Happy Monday, everybody. Hey, there we are. How goes it, guys?
Yo.
Let me make sure my times are going. Whoa. Ooh, don't do that. Okay. So here. Happy Monday. We're about to start the Weird Things podcast.
Yo.
We may be sans Brian Brushwood for some of this episode. He's working on all sorts of real estate stuff.
Hot deals.
He's calling his rich Uncle Pennybags and Moneybags. It's one of those, right?
Sure.
Which would be better though? Pennybags or Moneybags? Is
Penny
Pennybags a thing?
bags is funny because why would you need a bag full of pennies?
Right.
Here's the heaviest way to display $14.
Androj says, I agree, it is a happy Monday. I don't have any finals today, and I'm actually able to tune in. That's right, we're going to have some of the grads, possibly dads this summer, available to watch the shows.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's graduation.
Indeed.
It's looking good. Okay. What'd you get up to this weekend, Justin?
This weekend, well, we went out and we did a test run on grilling. So we streamed that on Saturday, but around the lake, when it kind of became famous over the last couple of weeks because there was an incident where a woman was fiercely enforcing where you cannot charcoal grill.
Mm-hmm. A viral video that went around of
which many interpreted as a woman calling the cops because people were barbecuing whilst black.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wound up thinking like, oh, you want to know what? Let's have all of our friends out and we'll do a big grill day. And we were going to do it. And then it turned out to be a little colder than we had expected. So we're like, let's hold off on it, but we'll still go out and do it just so we can kind of like
test it,
have a dry run because it was a new grill and everything. And we were just testing everything out.
So there you bring the grill. It's not like a communal grill.
There are a few communal grills kind of installed,
yeah.
But we're so close, it's easy to just
bring it,
walk down our own thing, and that's what we did.
Yeah, cool.
But it was fun.
That does sound fun.
It's good to get out, some fresh.
I know. I was able to get out and see some friends for the first time in a while. Have a few drinks.
Nice.
Have some fun. Times.
And Willie Dills was in town, so I got to see Willie Dills.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh.
I saw him perform. Apparently, I was in the same audience as Mike Dirnt, the bassist of Green Day.
Wow.
And I did not know until I saw it on Willie Dills' Instagram that he was taking pictures with Mike Dirnt at the same random East Bay punk show.
Oh, that's cool.
That he was headlined, that Willie was playing.
Wow. Wait, I didn't know Willie played.
Yeah, he was like a touring musician, not only with the band that they did a reunion show for, but apparently 2 other ones.
Wow. Oh, that's cool. Willie's
the bassist,
super multi-talented. I feel like
this guy.
I keep finding new things out about him.
I know.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get this.
Yeah, you ready to light the candle, Andrew?
1 second.
Okay.
Jack wagon rolling.
I always jack my wagons. Not a lot of people jack their wagons.
That was my favorite. What's it called movie? I can't remember his name. John Wayne movie. Jack Your Wagon.
Now listen here, Pilgrim. I'm gonna jack this wagon, and you're not gonna say hoot nor holler about it.
By the way, I swear to God, if you do one more sentence, then we're gonna cue you for The fact that you were so eager to get into a John Wayne impression is just...
But, you know, guys, in Jack Your Wagons, the song and dance numbers were the best, you know.
Yeah.
Jack Your Wagons, man.
John Wayne is one of those voices I don't think about a lot, but I feel like I can do reliably.
Well, yeah, that was very much on display when you ran headlong into doing a John Wayne impression upon first reference. It was great.
Oh my gosh. But hello to everybody in the chat who's joining us. We'll be starting here in just another couple minutes. We're all busy. We're all busy today.
Yeah.
With Tom being out, Cord Killers is a lot to prep. He does a lot of work on Cord Killers.
Are you guys are keeping it rolling without him, without old Tom?
Yeah. We're kind of doing we're kind of doing a co-hosting sort of thing. So it's Brian and me, and today we're gonna have Martin Thomas. And
great.
And possibly Corey Coleman. We're not exactly sure on that yet. But yeah, so it'll be a sort of thing where we can fill in personality wise while Tom is away. And then I guess we'll probably do something similar once Brian is out in a couple weeks.
Oh yeah, with Tom holding it up, right?
Yeah. And we've done that before too. So that's usually not too bad. All right, you feeling good, Andrew?
Great.
Got that beautiful smile? All right, then take it away in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Weird Things podcast. I'm Andrew Main, joined by Justin Robert Young.
Well, hello, friends.
Now, we'll have probably joining us a little bit later will be Brian Brushwood, but he's up to putting out some Brian Brush fires. Mm-hmm. Right? And meantime, here is our editor extraordinaire, Mr. Bryce Castillo.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be back on the show.
Gentlemen.
Andrew, actually, can you real quick make sure that you're on the right mic?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I was going to say, it sounds a little... Maybe if you tap it just to
yeah, it looks like it switched away.
Ooh.
Crazy Skype.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to just take it over again?
How's this sound? Is better?
Sounds really good. Sounds a lot better.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Cool.
Good catch. Yeah. Good call, Jess. All right, we'll take 2 in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Weird Things podcast. I'm Andrew Main, joined by Justin Robert Young.
Hi, friends.
And Brian Brushwood will be joining us, I think, in the middle of the show as he puts out a brush fire. And then we have Mr. Bryce Castillo, our extraordinary producer.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be back on the show.
Gentlemen, there's a lot of interesting things going on here. It's very, 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 I don't know where to begin. Well, there is news about the EM drive. Remember the EM drive? That's like that if you put this sort of special, microwave emitter inside of a special cone-shaped thing, that maybe this thing violates the laws of physics as we understand them.
Sure, yeah.
There's a difference between breaking the laws of the universe and breaking the laws of the universe as we understand them. You have to make that exception. So It's been this theoretical mechanism that if true would be big, very, very big if true.
So this as I remember the initial stories, for space travel, this would be gigantic because it would be a propulsion without the kind of fuel resources that you would otherwise normally need. That just makes things 1.5 million times easier to get from one place to another. And as I remember it being left, this is something that many people were skeptical of, but had yet to be unproven as people continued to test the test the tech.
Mm-hmm. So there was some research, some laboratory experiments that showed that something was going on that was interesting, and that's why other people pursued it. It wasn't just, hey, I got a crazy theory. Would it be neat if this is true? It was, hey, we've got this thing and we've built it and we're seeing some interesting effects. We can't quite explain it. And some people explain it within conventional physics, say, no, there's this Mach effect. There's other things could be going on here. So a German group of researchers decided, you know what, we're going to do this. We're going to build our own from the ground up. We're going to follow the exact specifications for how people think this thing should work. Designed it, went to use, let's call it German tolerances on things and the level of precision and whatnot, turn this thing on, and they got movement. But they also had an explanation. So they have this thing, they turn it on, and all of a sudden it starts to move in one direction. They're like, let's switch some of the parts around and see if it still moves in the same direction. Because if it's supposed to go this way, when everything's facing this way, but you switch, the cavitation chamber around the opposite direction and it still moves that way, something else is going on. And that's what happened. And they said, well, let's increase the amount of energy going in there. Does it move faster? No. And they're like, well, what's going on here? And they came up with a theory, and it seems to be they've narrowed it down to what's really going on. And that is that it's an electromagnetic field reacting against the Earth's electromagnetic field. That it's basically traditionally explained by, no, physics still works as we understand it.
So instead of the machine generating movement itself, it was magnetizing itself and moving based on the pole of the Earth?
Earth has, the weak magnetic fields, and it was just sort of pushing against that.
Yeah.
And so, which you could do. I mean, that's a thing that you could design an experiment in a laboratory to try to do that. And so it's not a revolutionary form of technology. It's a very inefficient way to try to, move something there as they understand it. And it kind of fits into that's one of the expectations people had for is it might just be repelling off the magnetic field of the Earth. And the goal of this is something that works in a vacuum of space where there are actually magnetic fields throughout, the solar system has one, the galaxy has one. There's an incredible amount of background, magnetic fields and stuff, but extremely negligible. So it's not really an effective means to utilize that because it's not working out the effect we wanted.
Outside of the vacuum of space, well, even in space, this would be an issue, but are there locations on Earth where you could test something like this without that background magnetism? Is that even possible?
You can shield it, but also what you can do is, if to determine if it is that or not, you can change the direction of which the equipment is facing. That alone will tell you, what it's doing in relation to magnetic fields. Right.
And you mentioned they did that, and it still ended up going the same direction.
They switched parts around of it, and they said, yeah, no, it's just a magnetic field. It's just sort of move like a compass needle. Compass needle is, in some forms, kind of a basic sort of EM field. Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I mean, like this.
Is this the last that we hear about the M drive?
I think the diehards are people who really want there to be something are going to pick apart the experiment and say that, well, they did it the way we did it. But I think that I'm always for other people replicating things. That's one of the problems, and this gets to one of the biggest problems in science, and that has been the reproducibility, and that is the replication of other experiments. There was a big study done a couple years ago where they took a ton of experiments in psychology, and they said, let's go replicate all these experiments and let's see what our results show. And they got results that were nowhere near as dramatic or nowhere near as positive as what was shown in a significant number of studies, which implied that, well, we tested some of the biggest studies out there, and we found out that we couldn't replicate the same, impact they had. And some of this was random sampling of studies, what have you. We found that a lot of research gets published has exaggerated, results. And there are a lot of ways you can exaggerate something. And I came across this when I worked for the James Randi Foundation, and Justin, you worked there too, is, you'd counter people who claimed ESP was real, and you'd see some people who might kind of try to do their own little study about this thing, and you'd see there was a selection bias. They might select a data set where it showed there was an effect, but they would ignore the ones that weren't. And this wasn't something that was only in parapsychology, and this wasn't something that was done necessarily consciously. If you're a researcher trying to measure an effect of does a certain species more prone towards having a gene that relates to being able to eat some sort of food, and you really think this is a solid theory, and you have a bunch of data sets and it's more prevalent in one data set than another, and you're convinced the theory is right, you will psychologically, we need to get rid of those other data sets because my other lab assistant worked on that, and we think there was something polluted or some element was introduced to that, so we can discount that, we'll rule that out, we'll get rid of this other data set, this control is probably pretty good. Scientists are people. And science moves forward. If you're a scientist, you want your research to generally get positive results. We talk about the idea that science rewards failure, not science as it's done right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as an ideal, it should, right? Because every study is worthwhile, even if it's proving that you're not doing it.
Yeah, and the problem you get into, like, if I'm going to go for funding, let's say I want to fund some study because I think that there's some psychological effect maybe isn't as pronounced, and I want to go test this sort of thing because I'm known to question this thing. A good chance one of the people on the committee, one of the people they're going to consult is somebody who's did this research 20 years ago, or somebody who was one of the pioneers in this field.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be inclined to say, no, fund this guy. Find out, prove me wrong. That would be the noble scientific ideal that we want, but that is really not what happens. And you find that there is the average age of people who are the senior paper writers has gone up. There's a lot of evident bias we find within the way it's done. Science as a process, of course, is amazing. It's the best thing ever happened to us. Science as we execute it, or science is how we perform the process, it's just as problematic as ever because it's people.
Yeah. It is weird, right? Because it's something that I found with journalism that, reporters who spend their entire days and I think do amazing, important work going into awkward situations where they are convincing strangers that they need to open up their lives and open up on secrets and things that could affect their livelihood economically, sometimes emotionally, almost certainly, and their personal reputation, are very bad at being on the other end of that. Like they have all, and this is anecdotally, this is just my personal observations, but when you start to look into somebody else, there is, instead of saying, no, I want to set the example of how I would love if sources treated me when I come to them, and I'm going to fully open up and I'm going to be more transparent than I would. It's very often the opposite. And it's like, why are you doing this to me? Like all the things that you would hate to find if you were just trying to get a source on an important story. And I think science, I think there's a human sort of element to that, specifically in something that is a slower, more costly cycle like research is, and there's fewer places where you can ply your trade as a scientist, that there's unfortunately a lot of that very human protect your life to the detriment of the larger knowledge base.
Now, one of our commenters, Dan Wally, says that capitalism and science aren't always compatible. Maybe, Dan, it's even worse in socialist and communist countries. If you look at the history of what happened there, of Lysenko and Lamarckism, and the idea that once the state says this is the way something is, whatever, it's human nature and objectivity. Those are the problems. And of course, humans, in our human nature, we're going to have that forever. We have to build ways to correct for that. And I would argue that in a free society or free market society, you have a much better chance of getting to the truth eventually, because if somebody disagrees with it in a state one or state system, the people in charge, and there's numerous examples of scientific developments that have held back because of the state, because no, we've decided this is not worth funding anymore. The guy in charge of this department has said so. Soviet agriculture cratered because of one guy who said, no, this is the way things work. In the energy department here, we've been following for the last 40 years, 50 years, one pathway towards fusion, which is the tokamak reactor design. And there are a number of people say, no, this isn't the way to do it. But the people in charge at the state level, like, hey, no, we've been doing this for years. We know we're going to get this right. They don't want to be proven wrong and find out they spent the last 35 years wasting everybody else's money. So I would say it's human nature. And that's the way, is you want to figure out, how do you have a system that says accounts for that. And I think now, having a study that went back, and I think Bryce pulled it up, they went back, they tried to reproduce 100 studies, getting into this healthy attitude of like, no, we're going to challenge these things, prepare to be challenged. And I think that will make scientists want to raise the bar. More competition, more people trying to replicate this, more people trying to go after to find out if this is real or not.
So what is there a solution to this? There are always going to be humans at the helm. Is it an oversight issue?
I mean, maybe. I would say part of it is the likelihood of funding the studies that challenge older studies and figuring out a way to incentivize that, and the other side is just having there be a healthy scientific community wherein, look, that nobody gets a championship belt, right? Like, you know, every great discovery should be picked apart and re-verified a million times, and it should be the strength of its, you know, robustness of how well it can withstand peer review and challenges that makes it an important finding, not the discovery itself.
One of the problems you have, too, is that there is a tremendous amount of studies that are published and the data sets are not made available. That's been a big controversy in a lot of environmental stuff relating to climate change, a lot of stuff that's influencing policy. And other people say, can we look at the data? And the scientists involved are like, no, it's too complicated for you to get to it, whatever. And it's not endemic to them. I have friends that are lab researchers that their data spread across a bunch of different formats, a bunch of different things, and they wanted to make it accessible to somebody else. It's problematic. When they go do a journal thing, they put the stuff in there. Often nobody even opens up the spreadsheets. They just say, oh, okay, this must be really, you know, there. So, you know, the solution is that, you know, the question is who's going to fund these studies? It's the same way we're doing it now, but let's encourage an environment of being more critical. Well, let's take a look at who's deciding how these things, the makeup of the people who decide who gets this funding. That's one of the things that can be disconcerting when you look at like how the National Science Foundation funding works. There is tons of risk aversion. They're less likely to fund things that might have a negative result. They want to fund something that's going to have a positive result. So if I bring something to them, it's got to be something much more closer to the orthodoxy, and it might have to be something that's a little bit too much, you know, closer to this. So, you know, I think there is funding. There's a lot of opportunities to get this thing out there, but let's create. There is an increasing climate. There is actually going back and testing other studies, and it's scientists saying, if I attack your study, I'm not attacking science. I want to make sure that we're all trying to hold ourselves to a higher standard.
So then it's on the peer review level that we can fortify this on in general.
Yeah, and I think as scientists themselves, you know, when you publish, make your data more widely available. And I have a problem with some of these, you know, for-profit, you know, science journals that, you know, where you choose to publish can have an effect. People will publish I'm going to publish here because it's prestigious. Like, great, only a small number of people are going to read this, and nobody gets access to your data if you do this there. Now, I understand you. It's like, I want to have that journal on my paper because it gives me prestige. It's like, yeah, but you're not helping science, and that's a choice to be made. And I think that's something we have to weigh. I think arXiv, which is, you know, arXiv with an X, is a really cool thing that makes things widely available. There's a lot of really cool up and coming journals because guess what? Science knows about this problem. There are a lot of scientists really trying to fight this thing, combat with it, and there are a lot of really good solutions out there. So,
yeah,
you know, but being aware helps.
Yeah. Well, you know what you should also be aware of?
Yeah, that's our Patreon.
That's right.
We got a Patreon here, folks. If you want to make sure that the #1 science and weird topics podcast is here for you in your life each and every week, well, then head on over to weirdthings.com. Patreon.com/weirdthings.
That's right.
That is where you can support our show. And not only do you get the satisfaction, you also get our After Things podcast, where we pivot a little bit and take our unique banter and talk about how you can continue to achieve your goals in creativity and in business and everything in between. Yeah. So go ahead and check it out. Patreon.com/weirdthings.
So last week, Elon Musk danced up the 405 over to a temple that's right in this sort of a very difficult to get to place when traffic is pretty busy, and did a live chat or live discussion with the co-founder or the guy who runs the Boring company for him, Davidson. Let me pull up his name, make sure I get that right. And they talked about Hyperloop and
Nick Bolton?
or rather the Loop, and then Hyperloop and their whole plan rather to start building tunnels. Any of you guys catch this?
The only thing that I caught, aside from a few headlines, was you saying that you had an ability to go there and didn't because you were too
Yeah.
embarrassed that you would fanboy out in front of Elon Musk.
Yeah, Steve Davis is the guy who he did this speech with, who I've heard his name come up before, but this is the first time I actually got to see Steve Davis talk. He's the project leader for it. So let me back up. For those Boring Company, it started off, like many things that people go like, wait, is this a joke? And then Elon Musk says, nope, I'm serious now, it's a fact. And which sometimes you don't know if Elon Musk's like, oh, how dare you call it a joke? Well, I'll make it real. And he'd been talking for years about tunnels. Like, why don't we have more tunnels? And if you live in LA, you get this because you're trying to get from, let's say, south part of Los Angeles to the north part, and traffic is really, really bad, and you're on a highway that there are buildings on either side of the highway. There's no room to build more highway, and there's cars everywhere. And if you live in LA and you want to stay in LA and you want to get from point to point, you're like, there's got to be a better way. A week ago, Uber showed us like, hey, we're going to introduce flying cars. And they use LA as an example. This is how quickly we can get you from point A to point B. And, LA using flying cars, which you're like, first, like, oh, that sounds awesome. And then you're like, how awesome would it be with 10,000 helicopters overhead at once? Like,
it would be intimidating.
Yeah.
It may not
less cool. Less cool. I think we can all settle on the idea that it'd be less cool than you might think.
It's cool if you're the one person in the flying car. That's when it's cool. But when you try to scale that, that's the issue. So Elon Musk has talked about, hey, there's this really cool old idea called tunnels. And tunnels apparently are a way to get from point A to point B. And he talks about the problem you have in a city is we go into a building which is a 3D structure. Your people are stacked up on top of each other, and then they've got to get to some other location at the end of the day. They want to go home. Everybody empties this 3D structure that enters 2D space at the same time as everybody else, which is why you have traffic, because you have a heck of a lot of people here or there that now we all need to go. I'm like, oh, wait, this 2D space can't handle it.
Going from building to road, sure.
Yeah, exactly. The beauty of tunnels, and this is one of these things that people, because you have people bring up like induced demand and these other things like, oh, you can't solve this problem. It's like, no, that's induced demand means you've been under meeting the amount of demand there is, and you have a system that doesn't scale well to meet it. Tunnels is, let's say we build a tunnel from, point A to point B. Let's say we build a tunnel from, big one, from, LA to San Francisco. Okay. Mm-hmm. You know what? We've reached capacity. The beautiful thing is we'll build another tunnel below that tunnel 10 feet deeper. And we don't have to shut off the original tunnel. Now we've added another tunnel. But we reached capacity there. Great. We build another tunnel. Roads, every time you want to expand a road, you're like, this row of buildings here and everybody lives here or whatever. Like, we got to evict you. It's easier now because of the Kelo Act. We've decided that you don't really own anything. But that's problematic. Where tunnels allow you to build in three-dimensional space. You can keep adding capacity by going deeper or sideways or whatever. And that's the beauty of a tunnel. The problem is you can agree like, if you just keep building under the tunnel, and these tunnels would be built under existing roads. So it's not like you have to worry about, your house having a tunnel going under it. Mm-hmm. The problem with tunnels is tunnels are expensive. Tunnels are expensive to build. You need big machines to do this. You've got to remove all this dirt and fill. You've got to put reinforcements in there, and they have a big impact to everybody around you. One of the ways they dig tunnels traditionally was, you would just dig a trench and then you cover it over. A lot of the subways in New York, that's how they dug them because it's the cheapest way to do it, but that's disruptive. So Elon, being Elon, was like, I don't know if you heard my work in rockets. I have to do a little bit there. And, let me remind you, I make them land now. And then he's like, because he's got some of the best engineers in the world. He's like, could we apply these engineers to tunneling? And people are like, well, why hasn't somebody done it before? Often, it's a great question. You need to find out nobody's bothered to put the money or resources into it. In rockets, nobody tried to make rockets reusable because they figured out there's only X number of companies willing to launch stuff or governments willing to launch stuff every year. There's a great article with this very bitter article with the head of Ariane, which is the company, the European agency that builds rockets there. It's an amazing company, but just very bitter about SpaceX. And like, well, if we lower the cost of the rockets, then what am I supposed to do to tell my people who build my rockets? See you next year? And you're like, that's not the right answer if you're explaining why things aren't cheaper. So anyhow, if you can make something cheaper, then maybe that would be better. And so that's what Elon's been trying to do with the Boring Company. Is can we make these tunneling machines faster, and can we make it cheaper? Because if we can do that, we could put a bunch of smaller electric vehicles in there, not big long trains like subways, but small little minibus electric vehicles, and we could get you anywhere in LA in 15 minutes for $1.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's the kind of interesting thing, because there's certainly as part of the Silicon Valley kind of backlash that we have seen develop over the last few years, there's always the kind of snide, every 6 months, one of these brilliant egghead CEO God Kings stumble upon the brilliant idea of a bus or a subway or something. And it's like, you can certainly appreciate kind of where somebody is coming from on that. But the idea here is like, all right, yeah, but also what if we could make that idea better? Like, what if we could make it more scalable? What if we could make it something that was, dare I say it, if not profitable, something that you could at least expect, would not be a tremendous burden that would go neglected, like so many of the great public transit infrastructures in New York and out here in the Bay Area are. These things are falling apart. They were not built to what they were initially supposed to be, and they are disintegrating. So it's like, okay, well, I think this field deserves a second look if somebody can make things cheaper, safer, and more upgradable.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the key things is they're privately funding it, where we have a $50 billion high-speed rail project in California, and as people happy to point out, it will neither be, it's not going to be high speed. It's going to be the most expensive rail project ever per mile, and the slowest high-speed rail project ever. And it's, trying to build it. They're going to build it from nowhere to nowhere right now, because trying to get it into cities and stuff is problematic. And it's going to cost $50 to $60 billion, and it's going to cost, if this thing were to be finished, well over that. And it's become a jobs project, and people involved don't want to kill it, because even if nothing ever productive happens with it, their people will be like, well, at least we'll employ people. And there are other people going like, yeah, but imagine if we had those people building something like loops, and then building a hyperloop, which, the loop, you'd go up to 170 miles an hour, and then the hyperloop, if you use that, which I'm less skeptical now, seeing the amount of enthusiasm there's been for that, where you go 700 miles an hour and you have a system of loops and hyperloops. That would be kind of cool. And if it wants to be privately funded, all the better.
Yeah. Sorry, Bryce, go ahead.
And you mentioned, at this, I don't know, this presentation or whatever, that the rides would be $1. What's the status of the current tunnel that he's building now?
So what he's
Bryce
doing,
has $1, and he'd like to get somewhere in LA when we go there for the live show.
So they have a tunnel that runs they're working on one that runs from the parking lot in front of SpaceX, which I have a photo of me standing in front of that when they first started, you could just look in there and see this hole in the ground. I took a photo there, and my friend's like, why are you taking the photo? I'm like, do you know what this is? Like, no, like, it's the tunnel. It's the tunnel, I'm like, okay, weirdo. That one is going to be like a 2-mile tunnel, a test tunnel. So they're building a test tunnel, right, which they think they're getting near to completion. The goal is, once they finish the test tunnel, they're going to put like a car or system that goes on it. And he says that we're going to invite the public to come ride on it. He says it's not going to be a thing we're going to charge. It's not a thing to compete with any transportation systems there. He says we'll invite people to ride on it, because I think they want to find out, like, what works, what's comfortable, how fast can we get people on and off this thing? What's the people's reaction?
Yeah.
And it's a great, way to move along. And they've tried to make it very clear, like, we don't have all the answers right now. We have an idea what we want to do. We know there's a problem. Traffic is a problem around the world. Transportation is a thing that can be improved upon. We think taking this old tech tunneling that people are like, no, we know everything we know about tunnels. Really? Do we? Do we know everything about building them? Do we? Or could we improve there? Let's spend, because it's been a neglected area. There's only like 1 or 2 colleges in the United States that even have courses that really teach you about tunneling and stuff at a big level. So let's approach that. So if somebody says tunnels and earthquakes, that's why there's no subways in Japan at all. Tunnels are the safest place.
the mayor. I mean, like we just had a 3.8 magnitude in Oakland. Like, it's built to withstand. I mean, like the idea that earthquakes happen are not surprise.
Tunnels are the safest place to be in an earthquake. Tunnels are the safest place to be in an earthquake because it's like on the ocean. Do you want to be above the waves when it's getting rocky, or do you want to be below? And so earthquakes are surface effects. So in places like Mexico City, when they have earthquakes, whatever, they use the tunnels as evacuation places. Mm-hmm. So this is not the issue.
Also, the best place that you can be as a tunnel is if Germany is bombing your city.
Fun fact, it's true.
I heard that somewhere in a book.
It's on in a Bazooka Joe comic strip, I think.
So
what did Elon say during this little Q&A? Is there any new news on the Boring Company front?
The news is that they have a partnership with the LA Metro, so the Los Angeles Metro, so to say that we're going to work together in conjunction with them to make sure that our plans work together. You're LA, Los Angeles, and city planners know that here's the problem. You're a city, you know that you're looking at where you are now and you're not meeting demand, and you're saying 10, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to have so much more demand for infrastructure. If you have somebody that comes along and says, hey, I have a solution, I'm not going to ask you for any money. I'm going to say, when we need to get permits or processes, we'll do our due diligence, but don't make us spend 15 years to find out that we can't dig a 100-foot test tunnel, and that's the problem. And the problem is that on one hand, you don't want to give, a company, an agency, or anybody like this free reign to do whatever they want, and then find out that, like, no, you are affecting our water table. Oh, this is problematic. Then nobody's asking for that because that would be bad, But you want to make sure there's a right amount of checks and balances. But one of the things that happens, though, is like, it took forever to be able to get to have like the LA subway as it is, go out to West Side to go down to Santa Monica there, because the people there didn't want it. They didn't want it. They didn't, because you had a very wealthy community there, did not want to have a fast conduit from there. Now, they would argue publicly totally different reasons. They would bring up all these other reasons, but when you talk to people on a private level, it was like they have cars, they have money, they don't want people who don't have this money or whatever to come to their area, and they looked at a conduit to bad neighborhoods is the way it was perceived. Nobody would ever say that publicly. Privately, that was the reason, and they would use every reason in the world they could to stop it, environmental, all these sort of excuses to stop this. And then you have people who are, I think maybe have legitimate environmental concerns that feel like they're not being addressed. I think they are, but you have people who feel like, well, maybe we don't know the impact. Then you have people who are uneasy with a private company getting that involved in public transit. You have people too. You have people who are like, no, we need to ride bicycles and stuff and that. And, people who have different viewpoints on how people should do this. There are people who don't like the idea of individual personal transport. No, we want bigger trains. Why? So there's a lot of competing interests for what people think everybody else should have access to. So.
Which is ultimately, the problem, right? Is that everybody has a different idea when you're talking about collective money.
Yeah, and that the problem is that the traditional answer to it, like in many projects, stadium projects, which I think are generally dumb ideas, or mass transit projects, the answer ends up being we put so much money into the project, everybody gets paid off and makes money.
Yeah. And so between the jobs and the construction and all the contractors, like that this will be a good enough thing for enough people that even if it doesn't do what we promise it's going to do, at least a bunch of people got paid.
Yeah. So a question comes up, a great question. Has Boring done any study to see if these tunnels could have issues with ground erosion like mining and fracking? Certainly they have to figure out what will these specific tunnels do. And when you're talking 1 or 2 tunnels or 5 tunnels, you're going to have a minimal impact because it's like building large sewer lines or what have you there, or subway lines. When you get into the massive amounts of underground removal of materials like you do in mining, where you take a mountain and you mine out 20 or 30% of its interior, you do have issues like there. Fracking, where you have water, you can affect the water table and you start bringing out sediment and stuff and destabilizing that and creating sinkholes and stuff. Those are real issues that have to be addressed. Some of those have been way overstated. There's been a lot of exaggerated things in fracking, which has made it problematic to figure out what's really a problem, what's not a problem. They take a place that already had natural gas in the water supply, and like, oh, look, there's natural gas after fracking. No, the reason they fracked there is because that was there. But then real problems of, over pumping or making mistakes or using slurries and stuff that cause problems. So, it's yes, I'm sure that there are parts of these trying to figure out, to what degree, how many of these you're talking, the tunneling is something that's a lot of research into that, how much you remove out of an area versus, how it affects the surrounding areas. So that's part of it. Part of their studies are saying this is what happens. And one of the things they talk about, though, is that when they tunnel, you will not be able to detect them from the surface. They said there's no instrument in the world to be able to detect that they were down there digging, because there's this sort of property with the further down a tunnel is, for every tunnel diameter, 2 tunnel diameters, the amount of any energy you give off getting absorbed by the surrounding soil, it's law of inverse squares. So by the time you get to the surface, you can't even, somebody walking past a sensor gives off way more impact than that.
So I have one more question about the Boring Company. I know when they originally sent out or put out that concept video, it was, you can drive your car into it. Am I remembering right that they are scaling back the idea of driving your car onto the system?
So that's a good catch, Bryce. So when they first showed the video for this, they showed public transportation vehicles and cars. They showed people they're using, electric cars in there, in some autopilot mode. And that got a huge backlash because all of a sudden, they're building a secret road for the rich. Well, I mean, the best way to build a thing, let me tell you how rich people like to build things. They like to get poor people to pay for them, which means you get them to use it. So, there's, you could argue an HOV lane that lets you use electric vehicles for a number of years was a rich person luxury because who could afford an electric car? It was rich people, but people like, no, those things are great. So this early concept video, we're watching, a Tesla go into this tunnel, but when you watch the tunnel, and it gets put on an electric skate, it gets put on a skate, right? So the idea is cars could go into these tunnels, so anybody's car could get put on there. Now, when you talk about transportation and mass transit, people who are very active in that hate cars, hate cars. They hate the ideas of this personal transportation vehicle that efficiently takes you from point A to point B in a time frame you want. But they also show these small little clear plastic margarine dish buses or whatever, which we're probably using, Tesla Model 3 engines anyway, or Model X.
They look like standing buses, almost like short standing squat buses.
Yeah, kind of like you'd see like an airport shuttle. So they show these too. But people sort of fixated on the cars there. They fixated on the cars. And so Elon was trying to say, listen, it's not about cars or minibuses. It's about getting a person from point A to point B fast, really, really fast, and not have to go to a subway station that is across town. Like I live in LA, people are like, you ever take the subway? I'm like, by the time I get from here to the nearest subway station, I would be wherever I wanted to be in my car. And the answer is not putting a subway station at the end of my block, because the subway station takes up a block. And it's a great answer for some places that have been built on top of this infrastructure. But for suburb, when you get to below a certain population density, it is inefficient. This is a solution where it is so cheap in theory, and we'll find out if they make it, to sort of you could put one of these at the end of a block. If you built a new neighborhood community, you could put one of these at the end of everybody's driveway, which would be the goal. If you're a developer, and here's the thing to think about this. If you have a much cheaper way to build these tunnels, if you can build these tunnels much more inexpensively and maybe even cheaper than roads to some extent, or the cost of a road, whatever, if you want to do a housing development 30 miles away from Austin, or 30 miles away from LA, or 30 miles away from Oakland, and you build a couple of these tunnels in there, and you can tell people like, hey, we can take you from your house to the city center in 10 minutes. That's incredibly attractive.
Yeah.
It's incredibly attractive. It lowers housing prices. It gets us the ability to be able to work much further away. It lowers the density of the cities. It lowers traffic. It has a big impact. And I think that's the future we're getting towards. Is it's not just to alleviate traffic in LA. It's also to solve the housing problem. We have so many housing prices are high in the Bay Area and LA. So a lot of people got to work here. There's not a lot of places to live here inexpensively. But if you could get here much more quickly via a 10-minute magic little tunnel, changes everything.
Yeah. Is there any? I know that the one metric in a very Elon Muskian way that they've made about the Boring Company was trying to get faster than, what was it, his kid's pet snail?
Gary the snail. So what they did is they said they talk about how slow tunneling machines are, boring machines are, and they use an example. They talk about they have this snail Gary, and they talk about how fast a snail moves, and like the boring machine right now is like 10 times slower than a snail, something like that, like 10 times slower than a snail. Mm-hmm. And their goal was we want to make a tunneling machine beat Gary the snail. If we can beat Gary the snail, or go even faster, says, we could, it would be dramatically change things. And trying to do that, one, it's improving the speed of the drill head, but also they started talking about, it's worth watching the presentation where they get into, here are the problems of trying to tunnel. You have the drill head, right? And then you have all of the dirt coming out the back of it, all that dirt. You got to move all that dirt out of the tunnel. And if you're a couple miles into a tunnel, that's a couple miles you got to transport the dirt. Then you've got to move that dirt from the tunnel site to somewhere else, which traditionally you put on a ton of trucks and you cause a disruption. One of his solutions, and you pay somebody, and it's an expense to haul it away. You pay someone to haul it away. And he's found out that they said, we could make bricks. We might be able to charge 10 cents a brick by using a little bit of concrete additive in the rock sediment we pull from here. And they said we plan on selling bricks. It's one of the things we want to do. So we want to take that rock that we're basically pulling out of there, turn it into bricks, these boring company bricks, sell them to construction. So that's one way they're trying to solve the problem of getting. They have a conveyor system. They took a Model 3 engine and they put it with a big, conveyor, put a Model 3 with a bunch of, containers to move the sediment out of the slurry or whatever out of the tunnel back out. That was step one. We found a faster way to get rid of the material. Step two, powering the drill. These drills are electric, and they run off of diesel, which means you've got tremendous amounts of diesel fumes that you then have to vent, or they're electric, which means you have a cable that's powering them. Now, this is not a standard sort of power cable like you see in a house. This is huge, thick copper, because that drill head is tremendously powerful, and those things weigh tons, the amount of cabling you need. So they said, well, why don't we take some Tesla power packs or some Tesla power walls, put them on another cart, and treat it like a cordless electric drill. And we pull the power pack up, charge it, or have it run the drill. When it's depleted, we pull it away, put another one in. So they're doing things like this to try to improve it, because there's just been, this is just the way we do it. And their mentality is, sometimes it's the best way to do it. And people thought about, the Romans figured out this is the best way to do it. Sometimes there's a better way.
So, all right. So when you say it's not as fast as Gary the snail, it's not necessarily that the drill can't go as fast. It's like everything that goes on around it of venting and getting rid of the material and stuff like that. Just the entire process is slower than a snail. You do need to make the drill go faster, but from an engineering point of view, engineers can say, well, we'll give it, 10 times the torque or whatever. Then as far as the materials we're using on the drill heads, and there's some really cool, they're like materials now that, like, part of what's cool about having a bunch of space, and that's largely this is a bunch of SpaceX engineers work on this, is that, there's a lot of new materials that are being used in aerospace that have not made their way outside of there. You have, metals like Inconel and things like that nobody's putting into tunneling machines that might, have a dramatic impact on that. So, but it's a lot of things. It's the power, it's the moving the slurry, it is the speed of the drill head to a part, but all these sort of things create these bottlenecks. So these issues, although solvable, are not something that people have tried to innovate on, because what's the point where we still have to do all these other things anyway? So who cares?
Yeah, because it's kind of like in the rocket industry. The rocket, there was an article interview with the guy who's head of Ariane, which is the European company that built some amazing tech. And they're like, well, how do you feel about SpaceX? And first he says, oh, well, the government overpays them for the launches, so it pays for the private launches, which is not really true. And then they're like, well, what about reusability? It's like, what's the advantage of reusability? And it comes down to, and this is what I just said earlier, is he's like, what am I supposed to do with the people I pay to build my rockets? If we're reusing rockets, then we don't need them to build rockets. And so he doesn't understand, or he doesn't grasp it. If you build reusable rockets and you lower the cost of getting things into space, more people will want to get things into space, space. And, he said, like, well, for us to do reusable, we need to be doing like 30 launches a year. Well, that's what SpaceX heading towards. They're lowering that cost, and now you're getting companies and countries that are putting up satellites that could not afford them before. And it's not a dramatic reduction in cost, because SpaceX still has tons of sunk costs in research and R&D, what they're trying to do. So the actual cost for the rocket itself versus what they're trying to pay off for the R&D it's different. But if you're a tunneling company and you know that there's only going to be 7 major tunneling projects in the United States the next 10 years, why bother? It's not efficient to try to lower the cost. But if you think that if we lower it by a factor of, if we lower it to 10% the cost, we think we might have 100 drilling projects the next year, then it makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have a question about the Boring Company, and I don't know what my design. I don't know what the right answer I'm looking for, but I'm posing this as a prompt. We talked about the Boring Company and creating this railway system would be privately funded. How do you feel about basically a layer of transportation being publicly owned or being privately owned and owning that much space?
One of the ways, I don't know what the particular legalities of how they do it, but one way to make it work is that you say, we're going to dig a tunnel under your streets, we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. The city's going to own it, and we're going to buy a lease for 40 years to be able to operate this. That's one of the ways we handle this traditionally, is that a lot of quote public transportation is actually public mandated, but then a privately held company or a company that's outside not under direct city control, but the city may own a partnership of it, or the city owns the infrastructure that it's using or whatever. And I think that you want to have checks and balances there, because you don't want to give somebody permission to build these tunnels. Then one day Elon Musk's like, all right, it's $1,000 a person,
Right.
Oh no. And so right. It's a valid question. So I think the safe way might be have the city owns the tunnels and leases them back to them.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a great new layer of public infrastructure and mass transit, but they're also I haven't seen this full talk, and I don't know everything about the Boring Company, but that would be something that I'd like to see at least generally addressed.
Yep.
In terms
Agreed.
of this checks and balances.
Yeah, you don't want it to be a transfer of wealth that's not compensated. You don't want to all of a sudden say, "Oh, you've got a great idea. Now we're going to give you, all the rights to all the roads and all this sort of stuff," because that creates a monopoly. And I would bet that Elon Musk would agree with that, and also say that, hey, we want other people creating loops, and let's make sure they can all connect up to each other.
Right.
But let's create a network like the internet of all this high speed connectivity, and let other parties come and play. He's encouraged that to a degree with Hyperloop.
Because back home in Virginia, we have a small light rail, and there is a big kerfuffle when it was built in one city and it reached the boundary of another city, and the other city had to decide, well, are we going to continue building that one road, or are we going to make our own rail and then have them have some sort of transfer station? Now that's partially because it's cities have their own governments there, but you wouldn't want 3 Hyperloop or 3 of these Boring Company systems duplicating each other's spaces.
Well, I think
at least I would think.
But that's, I think, part of the benefit of the technology that they're pitching is that you can just have tunnels under tunnels under tunnels, and you can have a better solution for things like that, even if cities can't come to an agreement on where something should be. Theoretically, you could have another one that is distinct and separate from it while getting the same result, right? Like you would have to agree on exits, but you wouldn't necessarily have to have all the expense of creating and earmarking money for another version of it.
Yeah.
The one of the things to think about the upside of this is people go, "Oh, it's a subway." These loops, basically, they're underground roads. The vehicles that transport on them use these electric sort of platform skids that run on a road. So you could have that connect to that thing could go up to another surface road and go into another one that somebody else. I can't connect my subway train to another train track without having to build track and build this and do cooperation right away. That's very complicated. If it's a different gauge, it changes everything. High-speed rail only works a certain kind of rail, whatever. But if you're basically just sending electric vehicles through tunnels, you can put those electric vehicles through any tunnel, you know? And that's kind of the beauty of it is somebody else said, we're going to build our own thing. What's going to be different? Well, we're going to have a larger diameter. Okay. We can still run ours, you know, a vehicle can go through mine and we can connect up to yours because you're in the next county and we're going to go seamlessly through there and a computer will keep track of mileage and figure out how we charge it or whatever.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. It's so weird because this is still emerging developments in a space where this sort of change either doesn't come at all or comes very slowly. You know, we probably I don't know when we would start to see the benefits of a system like this just based on how long it would take to construct even the first usable tunnels.
I mean, I don't think the longest part of the process is going to be the tunneling. I think it's going to be the bureaucratic layer. What's that, Justin?
Yeah, history would say that is always the longest phase.
Yeah, and you know they've already made a lot of progress. Like they've shown the video of the tunnel they've already dug, and they made mad crazy progress. And I think that they're still in the process. They're building, like they're working on. They have 3 different tunneling machines. They have the one they have now, which is just one that they've a modified one, and then kind of a hybrid one. Then they have a 3rd stage one that they're trying to work on and improve the tech. But also, it's like when they started this company, they knew nothing about what processes, what everything you had to go through, permitting and all that. And they said, well, let's just find out. Let's go to LA. We want to build a tunnel. What do we need to do? And so naive.
So you're our resident LA expert, Andrew. Did you see this this what if diagram of the tunneling system?
So yeah, what that is it's just an example of what they, like a starting point idea of what they want to do. And so this is a tunnel that goes from down below like LAX airport all the way up to Sherman Oaks. And to give you an idea of what's in between here is that it goes up through Hollywood, everything like that. And there's a mountain range in between there where there's 2 choke points there, the 405 and whatnot. And it doesn't go far enough east to make me happy where I am out there in the valley in Burbank. But man, but again, the plan is it's not like, and this is it. It's like, hey, here's an example of how we can connect these different parts of the city and how quickly you can get from point A to point B. And I think they may have chosen part of the example, just, these are big traffic points from there. So, you have, I mean, it's kind of amazing because when you look at this, it seems like Harry Potter magic, it's like an port key, the idea that, well, I'm going to walk in this tunnel and get here. Like I think about, man, I should go do the subway here. And then I look at like how long it would take to get from the subway closest. If I'm already at the subway closest to me to downtown, I'm like, I'm just going to drive. It's not saving me. It's taking me longer, Yeah. And so, yeah, it would be life-changing.
So for example, they had the LAX to Dodger Stadium, right? That is, according to Google, 19.9 miles away from each other. And if you were to try to you landed in LAX and you wanted to get to presumably a 7 p.m. Dodger game for first pitch, and you're leaving at 5 o'clock, that takes anywhere between 50 to an hour and 50 minutes, depending on, traffic and any accidents that might befall you, according to Google's data, right?
And one of the things to think about too, what the loop does, because it's so much cheaper, is there would be a loop at the end of your airport terminal. Okay. The idea that you would just go to your terminal. They have a photo, by the way. There's like the last photo in the slide deck where they show, like the idea of like LAX. But the idea is you could just go to the end of your terminal. You could hop into a loop station and be away rather than try to get to the end of my terminal, go through everything else, go through this, all this. And it's just once you just dramatically lower the cost, it becomes, an amazing possibility. And it's just, it's not a technology problem. It's changing the way we think about things.
Yeah. Oh God, look at this. It looks like Tron.
Yeah. So we're looking at this interior bay area where people are walking towards and boarding these cars that are behind these high glass partitions. And it says LAX, and then you hop into one and then whisks you away.
Wow.
Into an ingoing and outgoing tunnel.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So, but Elon Musk says in a few months they hope to have the test tunnel open. He says he's invite the public to go there. He's like, oh, it's cool. It'd be like a Disneyland ride right in the middle of LA.
It's without the view, right?
Yeah.
So, very cool.
I hope it happens. I hope that, you know, the frustrating part is there are legitimate concerns for this. There are legitimate concerns, and, you know, Bryce brought up one about, like, when you turn over something like this completely to a private enterprise, but again, most public transportation is run by some aspect of that. How do we make sure that we're not giving up too much? How do we make these things interoperable? How do we make sure that we don't, you know, create a system that becomes too complicated? But the other part that gets frustrating, though, is that you know there was a Culver City meeting where, you know, this was brought up, and there was a representative there from the city council who was just, calling the hint, you know, like, oh, this is harebrained. It's this, it's this. It's like, all right, that's a personal point of view, but I don't know if that's really the place to say this. Voice your concerns, you know, and if you have a particular view of how you think in mass transit, there are people that just think that we should spend longer to get where we want to go and share a vehicle with, you know, a bunch. You know, Elon Musk made a comment about, like, mass transit being scary or dangerous, and people are like, oh, how dare you? And it's like, I'm sorry. There are cities and there are places, there are transit lines where people are afraid to use at night. The people are afraid to use at certain times of day. That's a reality. We can pretend that's not the case, but that is the case. That is the reality. There are transit lines that have way higher incidences of violence because they're unprotected. There's not much is done about this, you know, and to deny that and to say, like, no, that's not true, is a falsehood. And so the idea of individualized private transport where you could use a smaller vehicle or whatever like this, you know, maybe not a bad idea. You know, I mean, it's just there's this utopian idea where we all get along, but there are predatory people and there's environments where people are hostile.
Yeah. Well, and not to mention, these infrastructures are something that will continue to be attacked by innovation, even with the Uber and Lyft scenario. Like, as of now, with the Uber Pool Express, I can, for the price of walking a little bit to get picked up and walking a little bit to where I want to go, I can get pretty much anywhere in Oakland for $3 door to door.
Yeah.
Wow.
And to get across the bridge, it sometimes can be, you know, around like 9 or 10. It is $4 to do it on BART. So, and that's going to this static line. Like, we are going to continue to see, like, 'cause those prices have fallen considerably as they've added new different ways to do it and connect riders. Like, we are rapidly getting to the point where in places that there are gigantic pools of people that want to use these services, that they're getting more cost effective. Now, does that mean we already have a tremendous amount of people that show up in the Bay Area from Sacramento and some of even as far as LA, because the bonuses up here in the Bay Area are bigger for super riders? We have more cars on the road. Like, so that creates its own kind of problem. But look, I'm all for, I like the BART. I think the BART's fine. I like the subway when I was living in New York City. Does it mean that it's working as well as it could? Does it mean that it is immune to the idea that it should be challenged by other solutions? No, I think that it should. Again, it gets back to the science thing we were talking about earlier. The worth of these solutions, specifically ones where we have our own money or our collective money going to it, or it's being run by our government, should be measured by how well it can fend off possible other solutions, and not that, well, we're stuck with it, so now let's pretend like it's the greatest thing ever.
You know, and thing I want to illustrate too is sort of what the magical grand vision of all of this is. The end goal is this, as Musk has said in so many tweets. You have the loop to get you around the city, right? You have the loop to get you around the city from point to point in a city. You build a bunch of loops underneath your city, which means we just build cheaper tunnels that we can move things back and forth under a city. We have that. all of a sudden you can get point to point anywhere in the city, 10, 15 minutes, wherever. It costs you $1 to do this. Then the loops connect to the Hyperloop. The Hyperloop is the tunnel where you suck all the air out of it so you can put a vehicle through there very, very fast and don't have to worry about wind resistance, right? So the Hyperloop is progressing more so than I thought would have been possible at this point. So then you have the Hyperloop that runs from LA to San Francisco, San Francisco to Salt Lake, Salt Lake to New Mexico, to Austin, to whatever. And you connect the Hyperloops up. So you can hop on a loop, get off, or hop up a loop, go to a Hyperloop station, and then maybe even go cross country by making 4 or 5 changes there. Go cross country faster than it would take you to fly in an airplane, if your connections are quick enough. Like the Hyperloop would allow you to connect up large parts of the country, through fast transit, be able to go from back and forth there. Then the next stage, so crazy enough to have loop, to have Hyperloops even crazier. Then the idea that hey, remember when they showed the big Falcon rocket, the idea that you could use this from point to point on planet Earth? Yeah. You hop in a loop or a Hyperloop station and it takes you to a BFR launch facility. Maybe it's under the ocean. Maybe you go there, take tube transport out there. Maybe it's in the middle of the desert. Maybe we build a big launch facility somewhere in Mojave and we isolate the sound. Hop in a transport, you go there, you do one on the West Coast, you do one on the East Coast, you platforms, whatever. You're anywhere in the world in under an hour. And that's the goal, is this super connected world. You can get anywhere in your city in a few minutes. You could get anywhere in your state in under an hour, or anywhere in the country in just a couple hours. Or if you want to go global, anywhere in the world in an hour.
Yeah. And we talked a few weeks ago about Virgin Hyperloop, which might be dropping the Hyperloop branding, doing deals to do cargo Hyperloop for freight.
So I went to, before they became Virgin, I went there and I visited them and I saw their presentations on this, and they were talking a bit about cargo. And I don't know that is at this point, where speed is the most important thing. And I could be wrong, but a lot of it's just logistics. And, you get paid your most, I don't know that's, because I saw an example where they showed here's how we could offload. They showed this this platform at sea where they could be loading cargo, taking cargo from a cargo ship and bringing it to a port without having the ship to go into port. And they're talking about using the Hyperloop for that. And I said, I'm like, what is the biggest choke point there? Is it how fast you can move the cargo from the ship to the port, or is it how fast you can unload the cargo from the ship? Because my understanding is the most time-consuming process is taking each container off and bringing it down there. You can have a train or you can have a trolley. You don't need a Hyperloop for that. You don't need a thing that moves 700 miles an hour, because nothing is unloading the ship at 700 miles an hour. And it kind of got this, it's an application, whatever kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know enough to know, but I know that I don't know if that's the best use for it. So.
Well, and it's my understanding is that this, and in the parts of the world that they were planning on starting this, which look like the Middle East, there are large tracts of land to be crossed, where even if your input is a bottleneck, you would still be able to save time with long haul transport, I would think. But
yeah, I don't know. I'd be great. Great if they can make that happen. Yeah, I think that would be great. And, pipelines have done tremendous for oil, but the amount of volume of material trying to move oil, things like that, is tremendous. So, could be. I don't know enough to know whether I got less excited about that. I like the idea of an all-purpose tunnel. You could put people through, you could put freight, you could put anything through. But personally, I'm more invested in the idea of, how can I get around faster?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, and again, do we need this cargo? Yes. Would it be? I'm not saying this would be bad for cargo. Mm-hmm. I'm saying if you ask me where do I want to invest the money and what I need to develop, which is going to get the highest rate of return, where that's my point. My point is I don't know that if you're asking what you want to fix in logistics and stuff, and one of my friends is the owner of one of the biggest logistics company in the world, that develop, responsible for the pallet systems and stuff that we use now and tracking stuff like this, and I've had conversations about this, about what's the status of this. Not saying therefore I'm informed. Not at all. I mean, like, yeah, no, this is a. I'm not saying no, never. I'm like, if you're asking me what points need the most improvement, I don't, I where to start from.
Sure.
I would go for getting me from point A to point B faster. Me.
Sure.
So anyhow, gentlemen, do you want to do picks?
Sure.
Absolutely.
I have a pick.
Sure, go ahead.
It's a documentary I watched over the weekend, Friday or Saturday, and I had seen the trailer for it, and okay. So my recommendation to watch this is not to try to sway anybody, because I don't think you would watch this and be swayed on the subject matter. But I do think that in all of the controversy around the subject, this at least shines a light on a dark corner that people don't know. So, Justin, you probably know the Rachel Dolezal controversy.
Indeed, yes, the woman who was in the leadership of a local NAACP or chapter, and was revealed that she was indeed not black, despite a physical appearance that might have belayed that.
Right, she was
transracial.
Yes, and I think that story really spread the idea of just the word transracial, so Netflix has a documentary called The Rachel Divide, which lays a very complicated patchwork of all of the things that happened before that story blow up and as it blows up, and her life today / last year or so, trying to provide for her kids and as well as like maintain dignity. I think that's the big thing that I took away from the Rachel Divide, is that what is motivating her has to be dignity, because the story, and I, as someone who only tangentially heard about her whole ordeal, was the transracial thing. But the documentary goes on to show, the people who are around her are not upset about that immediately. They are upset about, they believe that she was lying about other things related to her work at the NAACP. And it even shows that there are people who believe her, or believe that there's both truth and falsehoods in that story, but also it shows that probably the only reason that this story came to light was because she and her sister were suing their brother, and their parents sided with the brother and were running basically a counter ops, if you will, to discredit her and discredit the two daughters, and in the course of that, bringing this to light, leaking it to the press, that story blowing up and growing larger and larger. It's complicated, and I think I don't think you will come out of this documentary agreeing with her decision to identify as transracial or to identify as black, but I do think it will let you empathize with the struggle that someone who has been a part of a national conversation on that level, and continues to have to live in that nation, as sort of being known as this person. It helps you empathize with the issues that you have to deal with. I think she could come out and just one day say, you know what, as you are all right and I was wrong, and transracial is not a thing, and I'm sure that would make some people happy, but I think the reason that she doesn't is because that wouldn't solve anything, and I don't think that would change her life for the better.
Yeah.
But she would equally walk away with no dignity. And that's an interesting viewpoint. It's an interesting perspective.
I remember when the trailer for this came out, there was a conversation that I saw on Twitter that was very critical of it from a writer of a bio on her that the movie. There had been, I guess, a concerted effort with a couple of people who had written magazine pieces to kind of keep her daughter, Rachel Dolezal's daughter, kind of out of the story because it wasn't necessarily about her. And this is such a controversial topic that it felt unfair to, even if Dolezal wanted the daughter to be a part of the story, to make a daughter the part of the story. And that seemed to be the difference in this documentary, was that it focused on her as a parent. Did you feel that the daughter was a central element of the story, if not exploited?
Do you mean her newborn daughter?
I don't.
Okay, so
I haven't seen the movie. All I remember is a half-remembered Twitter conversation.
So I will say that part of the documentary is about her becoming pregnant and having giving birth to a child, and so a facet of it is, what do you write on the birth certificate? And but there is a good talk about her two sons, her adopted son and her biologic son. If there's another daughter.
Okay, no. It might have been a son. I just meant it.
Then it talks a little bit about the sons. I think it tries to respect their boundaries. Her younger son definitely says in an interview, well, there are definitely things I don't like and definitely things that I am not talking about and won't talk about, and it's left at that. But that is one facet of that is only one smaller facet of the documentary.
Yeah. Look, I think she's a very problematic person in the center of a very, problematic debate. In summation, I am very grateful that she exists because she was the subject of one of the funniest lines in those new Dave Chappelle specials, which, always great dealing with racial conversations.
Yeah. I saw the trailer and I would say the power of the trailer was that there were a couple of black women that were talking to her when she was doing a dress, and they were bringing up, you got a very, very succinct, point from them about, hey, you don't understand what's like to grow up with, to look in a culture where it doesn't reflect you or doesn't reflect something that's familiar to you or whatever. And that's so much of what makes them part of who they are. And I remember saying that's a great example, because it's like, we only know our own experiences. We only know our own experiences, and we can put ourselves and try to put ourselves in the frame of mind of somebody else. But, I'm a 6'2" guy, and I don't know what it's like to walk down the street, and I feel maybe vulnerable in some situations, but I don't know what it's like to feel a lot more vulnerable, and maybe I should, but I don't know what that's like at some points, Sure. I have my own insecurities about something, but I don't know what it's like to deal with insecurities. The closest I've ever come to being the super outsider was like living in Japan, but where people look at you weird, you walk in certain parts of town, people well, this is kind of, who are you? What are you? But I go home, that's not what I grew up with. So,
right. And I think the documentary does two good things on that point, Andrew, in that it equally succinctly lays out that exact argument that that the idea of being transracial does not exist in a vacuum. You have to deal with the history of the country and the current state of racial politics in America, and you have some sort of, for lack of a better word, a parachute should you want that. I think it also talks about her very rough upbringing, and I don't think that she's shown, and maybe this is where there's a bias in how she's portrayed, but I don't think she's shown as trying to take advantage of this identity. But that's something where
that is the most sympathetic that I felt for her, is that the world found her. Mm-hmm. Where is it? Where is it? Somewhere in the middle of the country, right?
It's Washington, I think.
Oh, was it
Yeah.
Spokane or something?
I believe that sounds right. Spokane, Washington.
Okay, so like she was doing this job, and unless I've missed something in the coverage, she wasn't looting it, right?
Right.
And she was it seemed to be a competent part of that management structure that people weren't furious with her. The world found her and had this conversation using her as the example. Now, I think her behavior going past that is something that you can raise red flags about, but also, hell, what happens when the world swoops down and decides you're now an international topic of conversation? You know, it's kind of crazy. So that's the one part that I've always looked at. Like, you know, if this never happened, and she just went and lived her entire life doing exactly what she'd done before and exactly a version of that going forward, she would have just been known as somebody who lived this life, right? It wouldn't have been a thing, but the universe had other ideas.
I would just cautiously add one more thought too on the subject of kind of identity politics and that sort of topic, is that one of the things that I think that often gets left out though is that we're very quick to put things into racial, but then we sort of ignore economic divides. And sometimes we conflate one thing when really it's about something else or whatever. You know, I was born in Opelika, Alabama. You know, I could describe myself as a cracker. I could describe myself as being this, you know, part of this redneck that sometimes that the left coast, you know, like to make fun of or whatever like this. But I wasn't born poor. I wasn't born in that environment. I come from upper middle class family. My parents are from the North, and I'm not. I could very easily take this moniker on because, like, oh, well, when they make fun of, you know, rednecks and things like this, it's, you know, making fun of me. But it's not really making fun of me. It's making fun of people who come from a poor background or whatever like this. And I think sometimes in these identity politics is people want to take on these labels because, hey, I can now identify with this group, but I'm not really the same thing as this group. You know, I had friends, and, you know, Justin and I grew up in South Florida, and you had very, very multicultural group, and you realized the differences weren't just racial. It was, were you from the North? You from the South? You know, which you could be Hispanic, but my God, you try to conflate all Hispanic people together into one group. Don't work. The differences are huge. And I think that, you know, I think that's part of, I think sometimes the appeal for people is like, I'm gonna put this label on me because I nominally fit this label, but even though you don't share those experiences with a lot of people from there. So, you know, I grew up in an upper middle class environment, and, you know, I can, you know, if somebody makes a redneck joke, I'm like, well, you know, I was born in Alabama, like, oh, you know, it's like, I don't care, but I don't share that experience.
Yeah.
Hey guys, guess what? I just showed up. Made it just in time for the beginning of the show, right?
Yeah.
We're just about to start.
All right, Brian, what's your pick?
Oh, we're on to picks. Oh, doggone it. My pick is, what was the name of that card game that I had open on the desktop?
Strip poker.
Oh, I don't remember. You were telling me about it this weekend.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the name of it.
It starts with a P.
Okay. Well, I'm going to type in P.
Patreon.com, my favorite card
probably
game.
Not.
Yeah.
Pornhub, what's that?
No, if you search type Hearthstone, StarCraft, card game. Yeah,
This
there
is
you
great.
go.
This is going great. Should Blizzard make a StarCraft card game?
It's the
Hearthstone. Is it Hearthstone?
PC game. Prismata. There it is. Nailed
Prismata.
it. Yeah. So it's billed according to PC Gamer. They said the best parts of StarCraft and Hearthstone. It's kind of a real-time strategy sort of game played with cards, cards that attack other cards. It's delightful and kind of hypnotic, and I really enjoyed it. It's only 20-something bucks, and it's got a campaign mode filled with a bunch of kind of JRPG style storytelling elements where characters pop onto screen and text says their thing, and then they jump off screen so someone else can jump on screen to tell you what to be afraid of.
I'm sorry, Brian, I'm going to be that guy. This is a card game in the way that you read audiobooks.
Yeah. Wait, what do you mean?
The world has changed around me too quickly that you have a card game that's purely electronic.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course. I mean, okay, yeah, it's a card game. Yes, but also I've become accustomed to the idea of reading audiobooks for a long time. It's fun. Prismata is a blast.
It's on PC?
Yeah, it's on PC. I'm surprised. It looks from the format of it that it's just begging to be adapted to mobile devices of all varieties.
Oh,
but
this was a Kickstarter.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it quite a bit.
Interesting. Very cool.
And what's great is like because it's turn-based, when you're playing against a computer, you can realize you're screwed, and you could just back up however many turns to get back to a place where you felt like maybe you had a chance of winning.
That's cool.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Justin, you have a pick?
Yeah, I like Deadpool 2. I thought it was, if you like Deadpool 1, man, you should go see Deadpool 2. A lot of those things that you liked are there, and it's a lot of fun. I laughed a lot. I think that there are some larger questions that you can have in terms of how much it makes you excited for further Deadpool adventures, and there may be some kind of directions of where they took the franchise that you can have, but by and large, I don't think that anybody who liked Deadpool 1 can go into that movie and not walk out saying that they laughed for a large portion of it.
Yeah,
I would say that when the laughs hit hardest on Deadpool 2, they hit much harder than in Deadpool 1.
Oh yeah, there are some huge
There's a lot of chuckles
moments
in Deadpool 1, but the laughs that hit hard in 2, like full on guffawing moments.
It's really, really, really funny, and the acting is well done. There's a lot of faves from previous things that we've mentioned, including Zazie Bates from Atlanta is great as Domino, and the young boy from Hunt for the Wilder People is great as a similarly foul-mouthed young man.
Cool.
Side note on the whole card game thing, did you see there's a Patreon right now? This person's creating animated maps for tabletop RPGs.
Oh, that's great. So wait, the maps, do
Like
they
for
use
Roll20 or?
Let me just Gmail this to Bryce, lest me say something stupid about tabletop gaming like this.
Okay. Because there are there's like Roll20.net, which will do digital tabletop. But
just take a look here. Yeah, I'm gonna go see Deadpool today at 5:00. Looking forward to that, and I'm excited.
Cool.
So, yeah, we'll pull up. So what this is like if you want to do your campaign and you want to have a really cool map to play it on top of, you just take your flat screen off the wall, set it on the table.
Wait,
that's great.
Plug it in. And now you've got your campaign map that's animated, and we move your characters around.
Huh? That's interesting.
That's rad.
Yeah.
Huh.
Very cool. And then again, what I like about this guy says, "Hey, I'll create these maps and make it easier to do the campaigns," which is cool. And we can see where this is going to go. When we start getting augmented reality, or our interactive flat screens like the Microsoft Surface, but cheaper that you can put on a table. There is this, if there's anything that I've observed in the last 5 years, is how much we really like to have the old school, we like to interact with the sort of the old school media.
Hell yeah.
Cool. Did you have a pick, Andrew?
Did you have a pick, Andrew?
My pick. Sorry, I was muting myself there. My pick is, I've decided that I wanted to read more. I wanted to read more, and the problem is when I go into the restroom or the bathroom, I would bring my iPad, bring my iPhone, whatever, and I would just start surfing the web, surfing the news, visit the Reddit SpaceX or SpaceX Lounge page over and over and over and over again. And I'm like, I'm not reading enough books. And I, like Brian, I love audiobooks. Audiobooks have become my primary way to consume stuff. But I also like to make fun of Brian when he calls it reading, even though I feel the same way. But it's just, it is the hypocrisy that is Maine. But I wanted to read more, and I'm like, well, what's the problem? Like, I do lack self-control. I said, what if I tried to limit? And I have a really cool one of the Paperwhite Kindles or I have a Kindle Oasis, whatever. But I like a bigger sort of screen or whatever. So I did what anybody who lacks self-control does, is I impulse bought something else to solve this problem for me. And I would say in the last 5 days, it has helped considerably. And that is, I just bought myself a cheap Kindle Fire tablet, right? So I got the Fire HD, which is great. These things are only like $150, right? And I have next to me, I have an iPad Pro, which is amazing. It's super, it's awesome. I use this, which is really, really great. But I wanted something that was just a little bit easier to just port around and not care about. So I've been using this with my books and stuff on there. And again, people are like, great, Andrew, you've discovered something that everybody else knows about and uses. But the purpose of which was I wanted to have a way in which I could just focus purely on writing or reading rather. And so, that's what I did. So, and I could sit there and I can read my beginner's guide or graphic statistics guides and things like this and stuff. So it's been very helpful.
It's funny. You would think that going with a cheaper version of a thing would make you value it less. But to my astonishment, it just owns its own category where it becomes adorable that it's like, oh, this is the cheap one that's dedicated just to this one thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't put apps on here. I don't have games or things on there. Like I could watch my Netflix or my Amazon Prime on there, but I've got devices for that. So if I take this into the restroom, it's already open on the book. It's already open on that page. It's there to do one thing, to have me read books. So, and you can they have the Kindle. What's the beautiful thing is the hardware now, like I had one of the first ones they put out there and it was okay, but it was still, the screen display wasn't, you could see the huge difference between that and an iPad. You picked up an iPad, like, oh my God, this is from the future. This is from the 60s. Now, like, it's good enough. It's good enough. A $150 device has 2 cameras. It has, not that I want to use them. The display, the dots per inch on it is exceptionally good. It doesn't cause any eye strain yet. It's not like you're looking at a bunch of lines, which the first ones did. So I think that, like, the cheap things now are really good enough.
Okay.
So
do you have the 10-inch one?
Yeah, this is the 10-inch.
Cool.
So, and I like the form factor too. Actually, for reading, it's easier, I think, to hold. So anyhow, that's a thought. If you're looking to focus your time and what you're trying to do, think about you could take a device you already have and say, okay, I'm going to take this iPad or my tablet, my Google tablet or whatever, and I'm going to strip off everything except for Kindle or Google Play Books or whatever, and you'd be surprised that making it less easy just to click over and no notifications. Wonderful. Get rid of Facebook and Twitter on this, no notifications on it, and you're doing the thing you want to do.
Cool.
So
awesome.
Gentlemen, it's been weird. All right.
Cool.
I have a weird things topic I didn't do because I wanted to have Brian on it. It might actually make it cool after things.
Okay.
Cool. Justin, are you available for us?
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Hell of a day, gentlemen.
Oh, no, there we go.
Hey. So, between not failing to get out of jury selection
Okay.
and my those Bose headphones that I live in, they broke. And
don't you have 4 more of those in this house?
No, not that are available. And so they're like, well, the fastest way to get it replaced is for you to drop it off at the factory outlet store. So I go down to the factory outlet store because it's 3 miles away from the courthouse that I had to go to. And then they're not open, and they don't open until 10 o'clock. And I'm like, well, 10 o'clock, I've got that medical appointment I've got to be there for. And so I ended up hanging the earbuds on the back of an ice cream vending machine. I took pictures. And
okay, I mean, I'm sure you know where they are. They know to expect them?
So then I wait until they open, and then I call, and I say, hey, here's a hilarious side quest. There's some earbuds over there for you. And they're like, okay, why are they here? And I was like, because I was told that we could, rather than me ship them in and take forever for them to arrive and then get logged in the system and then send out the other stuff, like I'm going on an international trip in 5 days. I would really like to have a replacement set of earbuds for that trip so that I don't punch anyone. And basically, it still has to be fulfilled through like the corporate Bose, whatever. But if it's one of their people that could get on the phone and say, yes, we have them, then they can dispense the replacement ones, and maybe it'll get there in time.
So were they amenable to the scavenger hunt?
They were not thrilled because it involved them doing literally anything. But I had the trump card of like, motherfucker, your superiors, this is their brilliant plan that I'm in charge of.
Sure, though I think they expected you to walk it into the door.
Well, yeah, they got there anyway with a note, and plus they had a fun scavenger hunt.
Sure. Hey, okay.
And then on
you
top
doing you?
of all of that,
Oh, did you end up not getting out of jury duty?
well, that's a weird thing too, because
Okay.
I don't. For all I know, I might be a wanted criminal right now, because
What?
I may be in dereliction of my jury duty.
You know you're trying to leave the country soon, right?
I know. Probably a convenient time before the heat gets too hot.
Yeah.
The so
Pigs.
so I had they said jury duty, and I called and I was like, hey, this conflicts with the medical appointment. What do I do? And they're like, just send a letter from your provider saying that you're booked at this time to this address, and I did. And then 5 days later, I was like, hey, sent this. I'm sending it again. Can I get literally any response? No response. And then finally, it's the day of. I'm like, fuck.
Oh, we talked about this on Night Attack. You didn't call him back?
Well, I mean, it was the weekend, right? And nobody's there on the weekend. And I'm not going to be able to call them before 8:30 in the morning, the day of the 8:30 appointment. Okay. So I show up, and they're all like, "Oh, you got that piece of paper? Go into this holding pen over here."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, but also I'm here because I'm not supposed to be here." And they're like, "Well, then you want to talk to the office people." So they send me to the office people. Go up to the office people. I'm like, "Hey, what's up? I sent this. I emailed. I followed up. I did all the things. I've got this medical appointment or whatever." And the guy's like, "No, you have to do this other thing." And then, as if like the thought just occurred to him, he's like, "Just give it to me." And then he's like, "All right." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Wait, what does that mean? Like, am I free to go?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'll take." He didn't say something. If he said something like, "I'll take care of it," then I would have been like, "It's handled." But instead, he just took the piece of paper away from me and told me like, "Yeah," and I don't know how to deal with that. So I don't know if I just bugged out on jury duty.
It was like you just like went, you took it, and then you were in like an RPG, and you just kept clicking on him.
Yeah,
and
did he
and you just kept getting 3 dots back?
Yeah, exactly. And he
mean,
was stuck in his looping animation, his standing animation, and I was like, "Well, I'm not getting anything more out of this guy."
So, no, you didn't get a name, no follow-up questions?
Nope. What I ended up doing is I definitely took a photo of my waiting in line receipt, because I knew it was geotagged with the time and location of where I was, so that later if I get in trouble, I could at least have some corroborating evidence. Because that's the thing. This dude took my corroborating evidence.
Right.
like I don't have anything that really indicates anybody said that I was okay to get out of
But,
there.
like, he walked away? Like, that was the end of the conversation?
Oh, he's there.
That's just weird.
Brian, you're
That's,
fine.
Yeah, I'm sure you're fine.
That's what I think too.
I mean, you analogued the thing that you were trying to do digitally.
Then I came home and we supposedly got the upstairs AC fixed. So not fixed. So not fixed at all. And in fact, now that we know what's wrong, I had to work out a workaround solution.
Okay.
There's a drainage pipe that fills with condensation, and when it fills all the way up, it hits a solenoid that triggers a thing and shuts off the AC. Like, hey, stop making cold air because you're about to rain water all down the sheetrock down below, which makes sense. Right. And so, and now that I know that's what happened, the fact that they said they cleared it out, but they didn't clear it out. So now it fills up and it clogs, and then at 4 a.m, I have to get up, walk up to the airport, take a piece of the human crazy straw, suck out a bunch of water, spit it out into a bucket. So now it's so hot that the only way to keep it running is to remove the solenoid that's supposed to prevent it from overflowing. So, and instead I have a siphon thing so that as the thing fills up, it goes into a bucket. I don't know when the bucket will fill. I got to go check on the bucket, but I guess it's been the AC's been running, right?
It's been fine in here.
Okay. Well,
and none of these are the reason why you were late today either.
Right.
So that's
on top of all of that, I had an 1.5-hour conversation with my tax accountant taking care of 3 years of backlog taxes, and it's a hell of a day. It's a hell of a day.
And then we got to do Court Killers.
Dang, man.
Yeah. I'm going to back up to 3 brush fires ago to the court thing. And my advice for anybody is like, I've gotten out of things because I responded with, "Hey, I don't," before deadlines, like, "Hey, I don't know what's going on. Can somebody get a hold of me?" Or let me take down the name of who I spoke with. And then I get the terse, like, "You didn't show up for this or da 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 this." And I'm like, on March 22nd, I called. I have a log. I spoke to this person, da 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 da. And then they go, "Oh," and almost to the point where I think you could make that up, because I think a lot of these systems are designed to trip up people who, I didn't get the message, I didn't know, or this or whatever. But because they know how inefficient these systems are run from the inside. If you're like I keep track of like correspond, like I tried to call on this date, nobody picked up, but I have this log, I call this, and then they're kind of like, because then if it escalates, if you're in a position like, no, I called the office, try to get hold of this, nobody responded, I took action. I wasn't lazy.
Yeah.
The IRS and other stuff, like, no, I called on this date. They keep track of like, no, this person reached out to us to try to clarify this, and maybe we didn't clarify it, because that becomes later down the road. If you're like, "Hey, yeah, I didn't know this thing." Well, you're supposed to know, no, I called and I tried to get an explanation and nobody would explain it to me. Then it looks bad upon them, because then it's like, well, this person made a good faith effort to try to find out or resolve this.
Sure. Yeah, I suspect I'm okay, but that's one of the things, like, I definitely had to log all of the evidence that I could while I could, so that, if trouble pops up later.
Someone says, "Tell us about the Lenovo Mirage." I will when I get it. That's a saga I don't want to have to put anybody through. But
before we get started, let me make sure there's not leaking water all over the place, and then we'll jump in.
Okay.
I sent you guys the link. I think we talked before about the Google Ledger.
I don't think we have, but I did see this article.
I sent you guys the link to the video, and I would recommend it's a few minutes long if you guys want to watch the video, because we could discuss this.
Yeah, I watched the video as well when it broke this weekend.
Okay, cool.
Have you seen this, Justin?
No, I have not.
Brian just walked out, but I am almost certain that he has not seen this. Do we just want to watch it before the
Yeah, before, because it's longish, and I mean, we'll ask if we think, I don't want to waste anybody's time. If people are like, "Nah, I don't really want to talk about this," but
then I'll do this. Cool.
So it looks like, Andrew, have you seen this Consumer Reports Tesla Model 3
I read
thing?
the surface thing on it, and they have such a contentious relationship between Tesla and Consumer Reports. I always, with things like that, I kind of say, let's wait a week or two for it to settle down.
Yeah. For those of you who are not aware, it is wait, are we all watching this video privately, or?
I think we should watch it privately, because I think to make people watch it.
Okay. All right.
Brian is still not back, so he's the bottleneck here.
Or, I mean, if you want to play it on the stream.
Yeah, I was going to.
But I'm sorry. Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah.
I was gonna wait for Brian, is what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. Let's wait for Brian. Yeah. Okay. Before we start the show, let's watch it on here before we start the show. Then.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just, let's not make people, while we do the show, watch it. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm fine doing that. I just need for him to.
Yeah. No, I no, you're responsible for him, Bryce. I'm sorry.
This is I tweeted out a bunch about this over the weekend. I have thoughts about it, man. It's I'm not gonna. I'm building it up too much. And then if we can keep a little tighter on after things today, not no hard out or even a soft out or anything, but we have to make the dock.
Yeah, the closer.
twice.
Normally I would like to be kind of done by 2 because that gives me an hour before I got my next show at 3, so I can eat something. Do we want to start after things and we'll just?
He's walking in.
Is he walking in now?
Brian, we're gonna watch this video
Yes.
before we start the show,
Right.
and then we will talk about it for the after things.
Okay.
All right, here we go. This is an internal video Google made in 2016 from Google X.
This man is Jean-Baptiste Pierre Antoine de Monnet Chevalier de Lamarck. In 1809, 50 years before Darwin published The Origin of the Species, he wrote what is widely recognized as the first comprehensive theory of evolution. His book, De Philosophie Zoologique, introduced the notion of an internal code within every living thing, which, when passed down through successive generations, defined the physiological characteristics of a species. At the center of Lamarck's theory laid what he called the adaptive force. He believed that the experiences of an organism during its life modified this internal code, and upon reproduction, this modified version was passed down to its young. Whilst not biologically accurate, and ultimately superseded by Darwin's theory of natural selection, the epigenetic theories put forward by him are beginning to find new homes in unexpected places. When we use contemporary technology, a trail of information is created in the form of data. When analysed, it describes our actions, decisions, preferences, movement, and relationships. This codified version of who we are becomes ever more complex, developing, changing, and deforming based on our actions. In this regard, this ledger of our data may be considered a Lamarckian epigenome, a constantly evolving representation of who we are. This is Bill Hamilton, one of the most significant evolutionary theorists of the 20th century. His work studying the social structures of ants, bees, and wasps had a profound effect on our understanding of the role of genes in social behaviors such as altruism. He believed, and went on to prove, that the driving force behind evolution was not the individual, but the gene. He stated that the ultimate criterion which determines whether a gene will spread is not whether the behavior is to the benefit of the behavior, but whether it is to the benefit of the gene. In the mid-1970s, the British evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins built on the work of Hamilton and others to popularise the concept of the selfish gene. In his book of the same name, he introduced the notion of a gene which, whilst devoid of any motives or will, could be metaphorically and pedagogically described as if it were. In this model, the individual organism is a transient carrier, a survival machine for the gene. User-centered design principles have dominated the world of computing for many decades, but what if we looked at things a little differently? What if the ledger could be given a volition or purpose, rather than simply acting as an historical reference? What if we focused on creating a richer ledger by introducing more sources of information? What if we thought of ourselves not as the owners of this information, but as custodians, transient carriers, or caretakers? Initially, the notion of a goal-oriented ledger may be user-driven. As an organization, Google would be responsible for offering suitable targets for a user's ledger. Whilst the notion of a global good is problematic, topics would likely focus on health or environmental impact to reflect Google's values as an organization. Once the user selects a volition for their ledger, every interaction may be compared to a series of parallel options. If one of these options allows the ledger to move closer to its goal, it will be offered up to the user. Over time, by selecting these options, the user's behavior may be modified and the ledger moves closer to its target. As this line of thinking accelerates and the notion of a goal-driven ledger becomes more palatable, suggestions may be converted not by the user, but by the ledger itself. In this case, the ledger is missing a key data source, which it requires in order to better understand this user. In order to plug the gap in its knowledge, the ledger begins searching for a device which delivers the required data when used. From this list, the ledger begins sorting the options most likely to appeal to the user in question. In situations where no suitable product is found, the ledger may investigate a bespoke solution. By analyzing historical data, it is increasingly possible to discern qualitative information such as taste and aesthetic sensibility, which may be used in the creation of a design proposal. With the advent of technologies such as CNC milling and the emergent possibilities of 3D printing, a custom object may be created to trigger this user's interest. In this way, the ledger is able to plug gaps in its knowledge and refine its model of human behavior. User data has the capability to survive beyond the limits of our biological selves, in much the same way as genetic code is released and propagated in nature. By considering this data through a Lamarckian lens, the codified experiences within the ledger become an accumulation of behavioral knowledge throughout the life of an individual. By thinking of user data as multi-generational, it becomes possible for emerging users to benefit from the preceding generation's behaviors and decisions. As new users enter an ecosystem, they begin to create their own trail of data. By comparing this emergent ledger with the mass of historical user data, it becomes possible to make increasingly accurate predictions about decisions and future behaviors. As cycles of collection and comparison extend, it may be possible to develop a species-level understanding of complex issues such as depression, health, and poverty. Our ability to interpret user data, combined with the exponential growth in sensor-enabled objects, will result in an increasingly detailed account of who we are as people. As these streams of information are brought together, the effect is multiplied. New patterns become apparent and new predictions become possible. Since the 1970s, huge efforts have been made in sequencing the human genome. Today, after many years of research and billions of data points, that sequence is known. By adopting a similar perspective with user data, we may begin to better understand its role. Just as the examination of protein structures paved the way to genetic sequencing, the mass, multi-generational examination of actions and results could introduce a model of behavioral sequencing. As gene sequencing yields a comprehensive map of human biology, researchers are increasingly able to target parts of the sequence and modify them in order to achieve a desired result. As patterns begin to emerge in the behavioral sequences, they too may be targeted. The ledger could be given a focus, shifting it from a system which not only tracks our behavior, but offers direction towards a desired result. We are at the very beginning of our journey of understanding in the field of user data. By applying our knowledge of epigenetics, inheritance, and memetics to this field, we may be able to make mental leaps in our understanding, which could offer benefits to this generation, to future generations, and the species as a whole.
That's pretty heavy, Doc.
Right. Ready to begin after things?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, take it away. Oh, in 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome to After Things. I'm Andrew Main, joined by Brian Brushwood.
Right here at the beginning, just like I am all the time for everything.
Every show, like clockwork. Justin Robert Young.
Hey, what's up, folks?
And our producer, Mr. Bryce Castillo.
Hey, everybody.
So we watched, right before, we just finished watching the Selfish Ledger video, which was a leak from a department within Google, some video they do, some internal presentation. They produce a ton of stuff like, hey, let's think about this. Let's think about this topic. By no means are these things like shown in the boardroom of like, now this is our master plan.
Yeah.
You have a massive corporation, a lot of people thinking about how you can solve problems, idealistic ideas about the future, etc. I highly recommend you go watch The Selfish Ledger. The Verge had an article on it. They were the first ones to get hold of it, I believe. Watch it and then come back, I think would be the best way to participate, or, well, listen to us bray about this.
We'll have a link in the show notes if you can't find it.
Yeah, I highly recommend go check it out. And I wanted to kind of get... I'd read about it and I had a reaction to it. Then I saw it and I had a reaction to it. Watched again, I have thoughts about this. And again, I need to emphasize that if you watch this, whatever your reaction is, understand this is not necessary. We don't know what it is. We know that inside Google, this is a video that was produced. Some people thought about, hey, these are some thoughts. This is the way we see the future could be. It's not necessarily Google's mantra, or not necessarily not. So
for those who are listening right now, but acknowledge that they're not going to go out and watch this, what would be a good way to kind of summarize what we saw?
I think everybody has their own reaction.
Yeah.
It basically asks what would happen if we allowed total data, I don't know, giving total
data collection.
Total data collection to...
Total data transparency, right? Like you exist with some amount of patterns of behavior and some amount of genetic code. They table the genetic code part, but they say, what if we knew all your patterns of behavior and then use that to shape, just as a gene essentially hijacks a free ride through multiple bodies over years and years and years. What if your pattern of behavior was the actual free rider through your life? Can we just appeal straight to your, as they put it, ledger?
And the hypotheticals that they suppose are, well, what if you told your phone how some area you wanted to be better about, and your phone would give you suggestions as you used your phone to say, hey, why don't you try this eco-friendly option?
Sure, or maybe you're like, hey, phone, I want to lose 5 pounds, and the phone realizes, well, from your pattern of behavior, I bet if you had a Hulk-themed set of dumbbells, that would perform 15% better than a Thor-themed set of dumbbells. Sure. So we'll just real quick create a one-time offer for you based on how much money I already know that you make. We're going to make these Hulk-themed dumbbells that we estimate will cause you to build 2.3% more muscle mass, and it will cost you what we believe is an affordable amount based on your income, which we also know because we're Google.
Well, and more than making bespoke products, making bespoke data entry points for this machine to find out about your weight.
The overarching idea is they want to use, let's collect all this data, let Google help use this data to help improve the world by helping you improve by reaching. And they'd use the phrase, this was their phrase, Google's values that Google considers important. They did say that, which was sort of, I'm going to say baseline, let's all agree data can make the world better. Data can help us make better choices, right?
Certainly so. Yeah.
We're all pro AI. We're all pro computers here, right?
Sure.
So it's not going to be the computer is trying to think. I thought that the connection to Lamarckism was torturous at best. And then the use of the Selfish Gene, one of my favorite books ever, the Selfish Ledger to sort of like, then there should be the Selfish Genome, which kind of, the analogy to me, I'm like, nobody cares, but I'm like, that's really not a good analogy because the ledgers, the whole collection in the book, The Selfish Gene, is about the gene. And like, you're making this sound sciencey and stuff.
Forgive me, Andrew. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that everything you've said so far, not the beef most people have with this.
True. No, I agree. But I'm saying from the start, this is where it starts from. We're going to use this thing called the reason we choose Selfish Ledger, because Richard Dawkins wrote this book about Hamilton's work and great, sounds sciencey. And then I'm like, no, you got the science wrong, or you're explaining it. It doesn't quite fit your metaphor. Where is this going to go from here? Because already we're on the wrong track. And then it goes, to me, downhill really fast. And the term Google values, because they pop up, as I didn't hear the Google values thing the first time through, but they show like, here are these things that you can choose, like be healthy. I'm like, everyone's be healthy. That sounds great. Now we have the problem that a lot of search indexes will show you what the popular choice for something being healthy is, or they'll say we'll go to this authority like the FDA, right? They wouldn't give us bad information about salt or fat or anything. Okay, we'll forget about that. There's a data problem there, which can be solved by better questions. They have the environmental thing, which, man, that you know, let's no nuclear, let's do solar wind, then great, we're still going to need petrochemical. That's more, we don't quite know what the answer is. And the last one is like, I want to buy local or eat local because there's this belief that that's better for the environment, when there is a lot of evidence to say it is the opposite effect. It increases environmental impact. It's less fuel efficient or less energy efficient and may not be as healthy. And I'm like, man, these values you have, you just assume that everybody is on board with, maybe are problematic to begin with, but we're already assuming, we're all like, yeah, we all agree these things are right. And I'm like, I don't know.
Sorry, forgive me. If we can dial back a bit, it seems like we got a little bit all over the map very, very quickly. It sounded like you were referring to what appear to be Google's core values, and you're questioning whether or not they're...
In this demo, for those who did not see it, you take all this data and then you can say, for the cost, the simple cost of allowing all of your data, not just stuff that runs through Google, not just stuff that you would flip on a switch to go, not just the pixels that pick up all your data traffic and everything and feed it back to these companies. You say, everything I am doing on my phone, with the phone being recognized as this great catch-all point for us creating our own a definable set of data points, that then, as it learns more about us, and theoretically we could have our genetic history be transferred through these data points of our parents that are using these things, and then pass it on to our kids, that we are now effectively able to get this application. I want to lose weight. I want to have support local businesses. I want to protect the environment. And that, I think, is where Andrew is saying the leap comes in, that now Google is deciding, okay, well, here are values that we can all agree are good for mind, body, and community, that might have dubious issues tied to them.
Perverse consequences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so to me, I do agree that it's a little bit sloppy on, you know, Lamarckian science is a weird peg to hang all of this on, since it was so thoroughly disproven. And in fact, it was, I want to say, was it the Soviets that embraced Lamarckian?
Lysenkoism, yeah.
Oh, Lysenkoism, yeah, right? Not great associations with Lamarckian theories of evolution.
And status, totalitarian states.
All of that, neither here nor there. So that's fine. Poetically, I was on board, where it's like, okay, well, but poetically, is there a lesson to be learned? And they threw in the word epigenetics, which I don't know exactly refers, but to me, the part that made me pause was, and I don't think they flat out ask this question, but they should. The question is, let's say it is possible for an algorithm to watch everything you do and essentially not deconstruct, not reveal as if it's a hidden secret that nobody knew and then suddenly they figured it out, but label what it is you do and how you tend to react to certain things. Now, if it was another human, we would label this as a lovely person who, quote unquote, gets us, right? We love it when another person can predict what it is, how it is we're going to react, because then that other person can surprise and delight us by saying, oh, well, I told you this because I knew otherwise you wouldn't get the surprise. And I know you love surprise birthday parties. So it finally happened. You got a surprise birthday party. And we think that's delightful. What changes when it's not a person, but a system or a team or a global corporation? Andrew?
I have my hand up.
Okay.
I have my hand up. It's back to incentives. Brian, would you rather have you and your accountant do your taxes or the IRS do your taxes?
Oh, that's
For me,
interesting.
I'm all for. I love the idea of an AI doing this. Love the idea of doing an AI doing this. One that I own, one that I know its first and primary customer responsibility is to me, and I assume, and there can be other incentives there, when it's this third party that has, and any third party to an extent, you're going to have, if you upset Google and you lose your Google account, you're kind of effed, And the idea of this third party, which I know what its incentives are, they've made it very clear. We've watched Google's incentives as they've evolved as a marketing company, a company that does this sort of stuff. That, like we said, they got rid of the do no evil because, hey, we're building, technology for the Defense Department for robots and stuff, but it's not involved in killing people. And it's like, I personally have no problem with that. But if I have this do no evil approach, that's debatable. So my issue is not with a third party or robot or whatever. There are companies that I trust more than other companies. No company I trust completely. I trust Apple a lot with my data privacy. I trust Apple a lot. Apple will make a really crappy advertising product like iAds because they don't want to be creepy about data, right? Because they make so much money in buying the device. Google's not a company that I feel good about that. And also, but I don't feel comfortable with Apple handling me trying to make moral or ethical choices because I think that I love Apple, but Apple will come out against, some state, I'm all for, I think anybody should be able to get to marry, should be able to marry. Apple will come out against a state that has an opposite approach towards that. Great. And they will say nothing about what goes on in other countries that have draconian policies because it's bad business. And I get that, but you're making business decisions. You pretend to have these ethical viewpoints, but when there's an economic cost to them it's too high, you bow, you take in, you just sort of cave. And I'm aware of this, so that's my point is that I'm not completely happy to turn over all my ethics to them or my life choices to them because I think they make choices that are inconsistent and hypocritical.
Well, I think that there is one other question to be asked here, and that is something that I think is becoming more and more of maybe the most mainstream larger tech argument that is kind of breaking itself into a larger audience. Who owns your data and what do you do about it? How much should you be able to always export and what applications does it have beyond just serving the master that generated it, right? How much should I be able to, if Facebook is able to run a tremendous company based on using the data of me and my friends to sell to advertisers, should there be a button where I can export that and port it into something else where I can do something else with it? And so that's where I think this idea is interesting. I don't quite know if the idea of greater data surrender, I mean, to me, in hindsight now, we've talked about it a little bit, all the floofy science talk and the French chapter headings, which if you are have watched it, each chapter of this idea, this essay, has its own, kind of high-minded idea. It seems like a very flowery version of, so we'll be able to do more if you just give us more data. We'll be able to know more if you just give us more data.
Unus pro omnibus.
Or maybe it's Latin or whatever, right? So, it's a simpler idea than I think they wanted.
The quill of Cornelius Fudge.
Yeah, exactly.
These are not jokes. I'm just reading the chapters.
It's okay, we get it, man. You went to college. On the other hand, it's just, okay, if you had more data and you got more data faster, you could do different things with it.
Il Grillo Parlante.
Right? Oh my God. I remember I took a first date to Il Grillo Parlante. It was fantastic.
Well, so what is it about this that makes us feel so oogie? Is it the fact that it's a corporation doing it and not a government entity? Is it the fact that it's anything but an academic institution? Is it a fact that we can understand the dollar motive at the end?
I think it's two things. In terms of a mainstream audience, we love technology, but many times we are consistently freaked out the more we find out exactly how much data we generate and how that data is used. It is a rinse and repeat cycle on Daily Tech News Show whenever there's big mainstream coverage of stuff, and you could look no further than everything that happened with Facebook, that in general, the more you could just write Facebook and Google's business model and put a salacious headline on top of it, and it would read like an expose that people are like, oh my God, they collect your data. And did you know, controversial plan, Facebook offers an easy way for every website you go to track your movements, even when you're not on Facebook. And that's Facebook Pixel. It is a cornerstone of what we understand as the modern advertising ecosystem, but people are freaked out by it. They are very weirded out by how much we are tracked on our daily basis, and they don't know about it. I mean, there's a lot of willful ignorance as we enter into our adolescence of modern technology.
So my issue kind of comes from this is severalfold. Is the idea of a monolithic organization that's almost Leviathan in sort of the classical sense, the all-powerful thing, determining our values, determining these are what the values we should share are. I have a problem with that because I think that there is no right answer to many of these questions. There's 7 billion people pursuing their own self-interest and things working out overall. But the idea of the sort of the classical sort of like, once we have all the information, we can figure out how to make the world better. Well, I don't know that we're going to reach a world that we all think is the perfect world. And to me, it's disconcerting because anytime you get a group of smart people together, they're like, I think if we were in charge, we could figure these things out. And that to me is scary.
So there's two comments that appear to be at odds in the chat right now, and they express two very different opinions. And I would love to explore the difference between them. One of them is Zelo_S says, I don't want anybody doing it. And by doing it, he means logging what people do. Like, and I think that speaks to this deep-seated desire many of us have to believe that we are homunculi, that we are the ghost in the machine, that we are above our corporeal form, that we're not just crude matter undergoing chemical and psychological processes with predictable outcomes. We want to believe that we are, in the libertarian sense, in charge of our own destinies. And the more, whether it's an AI, whether it's a team of spies working for the KGB, whether it's a significant other, the more they can figure out what our algorithms are, the less we feel like autonomous beings. And then on the flip side, we have ill_Inc. saying, my data is not my own, my body is not my own, my mind is not my own, which is the flip side, which is we're just feedback loops existing in this weird soupy meat space, and we act in predictable ways, and we don't own the carbon atoms in our body. We don't own the exclusive rights to know what we did and did not do, because everything we do has an impact on the world around us. And I think both of them are extreme and distasteful to me, but where do you divide that line?
The lines will be arbitrary. That's the first thing you have to what you own and who you are is an arbitrary definition. And you kind of come to this fuzzy sort of area of like, yeah, we generally agree this is like intellectual property, other things. There is no abstract law of the universe that says any concept of what this is. And we say, we think this works best. And then other people are like, no, we don't. Let's change this. When it comes to what you own or what, the whole idea of, free will is an interesting thing because we keep moving the goalpost. It used to be, does God control who we are? And then when we said, you know what, like there's some problematic ideas there, then what's the point of being a person if God controls all our actions? Then it's like, okay, God gives us a choice. And then once we had sort of classical physics, we're like, yeah, but does the universe sort of determine? Are we sort of clockwork set in motion? And so free will went from, are we controlled by God or gods, to are we then free will, are we determined by our universe around us? And then once classical physics sort of found its sort of the edge of its boundary, we realized that there's an entirely bigger set of rules that say that, no, you cannot predict these sorts of things. We got, okay, but are they these internal things inside of us predictable, or are these systems sort of determinable? And it's like, we keep moving the goalposts there. And I'm kind of like, I think like, I don't care what moves the puppet. Once we cut the strings, that's fine. The puppet, there are things inside the puppet that work inside the puppet. And that free will, I'll call that free will, whatever the puppet's doing, because we got rid of the strings to the God. We know the universe isn't determined. There's enough randomness there. That being said, the question, who owns your data? Listen, what I observe, I own. If I observe these things, or I have the opportunity to use these things, I can read it. That gets into this fuzzy area. That's how I'll define it. But the idea that we don't own anything, that can be, somebody can say that, but then it can say, how does the world function with that? How do we make use of it? I don't know. We come up with an arbitrary definition that gives us the best results.
I don't know what the middle ground is, because you dropped an interesting statement, which is I observe the things, or I own the things I observe. If you own them, then they're
My
yours
observations.
Sure, your observations. But by that logic, if you own them, then they're yours to resell, because you know for a fact you saw Brian Brushwood right now on the After Things podcast. That is yours, and you own it because you saw it and it's live. And CNN calls you and they're like, hey, we need to find out the truth of whether or not Brian appeared on Weird Things at this time. We would like to pay you $50. Will you personally verify that he was on the After Things podcast? So I think you're right. You do own it, but then a side effect of that is, how comfortable are we with autonomous beings? And if I own the camera that logged the entry of this guy who showed up at this place at that time, do I own the fact that that person was there at that time? And is it mine to resell to another entity? And I think by the letter of the law, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Maybe by the spirit.
Yeah. I mean, you get the fuzzy areas get into okay, you remembered every single thing Brian said. Would you write a transcript of what Brian said? And that's where law has to say, no, that's you're taking too much of Brian's property. But I can summarize it. I can do a lot of things with that, and I can do that. And so yeah, if I use the web, I've made this before. I don't think we should pass a law to change how Google or Facebook functions. As creepy as I am by them, as creeped out as I am by how they use the data, what they do with it, they have the right to do this. I have not logged on Facebook this year because to me it's too much for me, but I would fight a law to stop them. I would fight a law to stop them from doing what they do. Even though I don't like what they do, I don't like the way it's done. The Google selfish ledger, I think is creepy, it's invasive. I'm freaked out. What happens when what's the Chinese version of this? What's the Chinese version of this, where you've got to make the government happy, meaning the central party happy, meaning Z happy, meaning a totalitarian state happy, or what's the version if we change our laws in our own country to this thing? I don't know. That being said, if Google wants to build this, I wouldn't put a law in place to stop them. I would oppose a law to stop them, because I think everybody should have that choice to make for them. And I think many people share those values and they want to have that right to do that. But I'm just to tell you, me, creeped out, not for me. I want an alternative.
Well, and I think that's the idea of a phone scraped data collection is interesting. Just like I think us being able to export our data from these services for which we have created tremendous value is something that we should be looking to do more of. But also, we do need our own way to synthesize it. And I think that's where, to me, there's a lot of room to grow.
Two things. One, OpenBios is China already does this. Their citizen credit thing is an early implementation of this, and that is a scary conversation unto itself. Justin, to your point to who owns the data, I don't think I own the data Google's collected on me, because Google, maybe they've spent a considerable amount of money building a profile of me. There's a lot more about it, whatever. I don't own that. I don't think I own that. I can be creeped out and say, I won't deal with you guys unless you give transparency to it. But end of the day, if somebody has a profile on me, somebody's done their own research on me, whatever, they own it. I
don't think that, and you should force them to offer up your data, but in the same way that Twitter now has an export tool that you can get all the tweets that you've ever tweeted, right? And you can export that into a spreadsheet. There is some layer of stuff that I would like to see. And I think that if there are ways that I can use that they don't have to give me their model, but they can, if there is raw data that could be given that I could then synthesize through another service, I would like it.
Sure, I understand it, but I say that a part of the issue too is that one of the things that you can pull up your Google, a certain amount of Google data, and Facebook says, here's the data, but that's it's kind of BS because a big part of what they do is, they will use face matching in your photos to see who your friend network is. So there's an entire different data set that says, we know you're friends with Brian, we know you're friends with these persons. So we know if we put an ad to you and an ad to this person within a 24-hour period, it has a multiplier effect. They're never going to tell you that data set because that's proprietary data. Their ability, a lot of what they know about you, they will not tell you because it's not like they need to put microphones in your home. They can take your publicly available data you gave them and generate entirely new data sets, of which they're not going to share. And that's, so to me, it's, that's that whole other issue. It's like,
well, and that's the flip side, right? Is like, whether it's an individual or a corporate entity, aren't they entitled to their own private thoughts? Like,
agreed.
Like, for example, if what they're thinking is, I'm pretty sure, hey, we've just been publicly given the subjects of next week's Weird Things podcast. My private thought is that Brian and Andrew are going to fight about this one issue. Like, are they obligated to share that with everybody, or are they? Do they have the freedom to say, after watching Brian and Andrew in 200 previous episodes of the show, we think they're going to fight, and as a result, let's make sure to run this carbon fiber ad right before it because that will play into the argument one way or the other. Like, it seems like they should be entitled to that, right?
I agree. I 100% agree. And that's to me the scary part. And when Andrew says scary does not mean therefore we need laws to protect us.
Right.
Andrew means scary means just be aware of that they can take a data set, all of the stuff that everything we've clicked on there and say, yeah, no, here's all the data we have on you. Like, well, no, that's not true. Because you can take that data and you can put it against a model of somebody else and you can know more about me.
Well, there's what hard data they have, and then there's what extrapolations they make from the data, right?
And then the data between you and everybody, like, oh, here are your 5 friends. Well, what happens when I don't have access to your data, Brian, or Justin's data, but I bet you if you put our 3 data sets together, you would see a lot of emergent patterns and things like that would be very, very, that would make us go, oh, wow, we're never going to get that. And it's not their responsibility to give it to us. So me, it's like, yeah, it'd be nice, but I'm not going to get, it's, we don't even get transparency in our own government about tell us what you know. So.
Well, so we've been talking a little bit on the individual and the micro level, but how do you guys feel about the idea of Google basically installing a macro level layer on human civilization?
That's one of the weird parts that sort of short circuits my intellectual interior debate about the right and wrong of it. Because yes, it's creepy that Google's going to use this to make a profit. It's creepy that, somebody might feel invaded upon and so on. But on the flip side, if I back out 1,000 years and ask the general question, is it bad that humans divert billions of dollars of resources to finding out how and why humans think what they think? It kind of seems noble. Seems like that's stuff we should know.
But no, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm all for using AI and stuff to address questions. My problem is that in society today, among people who are leaders and people who are innovators, there is a complete lack, there is often very much a lack of, wait, is this really the right solution? Is this the right solution? There is this, yeah, we love this, let's go do this. Like, wait, let's question this. And that was my problem. Is the 3 examples they went from a little bit, kind of a lot, like, no, this is really debatable, but and that's the problem we run into a lot in government, corporate, whatever sort of levels, is you get a groupthink that comes in like, yeah, we all want this, right? And you're like, no, we don't know that that's really the right way. Like, no, of course. And let's ask the deep questions of, if I felt confident that we were really asking, like, how do we solve, what are the problems? And because we don't even ask, like, what are the problems before we've tried to figure out solutions to them.
Well, and so this comes back to the disagreement between, or the fundamental disconnect between diagnosis and prescription, right? So on the one hand, I applaud that they are diagnosing the human condition and that they are figuring out why we make the decisions that we make. I will absolutely cede your point that the prescription is to now we can take advantage of people's insecurities and sell them a scale that is exactly designed to appeal to their personal aesthetic at their lowest emotional point.
I love, like, Google, which is now Alphabet. They own a company called Calico, which is like California Life Sciences, which is working on trying to find cures for disease, life extension. All love that. They're using machine intelligence and stuff. I think it's wonderful. And part of the reason I love it is they can take a specific problem that I, as an individual, can say, yeah, I would like to live longer. And other people are like, no, I don't believe in living longer. I'm like, great. You don't have to do that thing. If your problem is me living longer, we're going to be forever having a dispute. Well, no, we won't, because you'll die. And if I have the benefit from it, then, you know, the point is like, I love that. Let's ask these specific questions. And then we got to figure out, like, you know, some of those convoluted things you'll ever hear sometimes are from science ethicists, because they'll sometimes realize, like, man, these people are very opinionated about how they think things should be. And some of these things, you got to let the world decide. You got to let the market decide. So I'm excited about the potential for these technologies and addressing specific asking questions about stuff. I'm less excited when they're saying, and therefore you need to do this, or therefore, because when they're like, Google's values, like, I'm creeped out by your values, guys. I'm very creeped out. So I'm not excited about a system where the most powerful, you know, search engine in the world and data collection organization in the world and the biggest marketing company in the world is now determining values. That's
what if they had
scary
Latin chapter titles?
But also, like, only occasionally Latin. Sometimes they're like vaguely French.
Yeah.
Or maybe look like they came from English literature.
Yeah.
Also, what if the entire presentation was made of clip art that they bought from Bond 5?
Yeah.
Yeah. But let me just say that, like, Brian brought up a very good point early on where, I mean, I was taught about, like, I was going sequentially what frustrated me, like the selfish ledger, and then, like, you know, talking about Lamarckianism, and then in the Soviet, so Lysenkoism was, Lysenko was I would call him a scientist, but he's not really a formally trained scientist, who thought, like, if we want to have wheat that can, like, survive, like, you know, in, you know, cold winters, let's just take a bunch of wheat and, like, cool it, make it very, very, very cold, you know, and then we'll plant it and it should be stronger. Not see which wheat survives and take the offshoot children from that. He was really a believer that, like, if you keep cutting mouse tails, eventually the mice will be born with short tails. There is tiny little things to deal with in epigenetics, like surface myelination of DNA. There is a tiny factor, but that's not really how you get to where you want to get to overall. And it was a flawed idea, but the state believed if you want to increase the agricultural growth of what we're trying to do, we know everybody knows this is what we want to do. And Lysenko was taught in Soviet schools. Everybody knew this is how you do it in Soviet schools. And it was wrong. It was wrong, and it crippled their agricultural production and caused massive famines. And that was a scary thing. You watch this video, we're like, well, we all know we want to buy local, right? Right? We want to buy local, right? It's like, sometimes.
Yeah. Man, I don't even want to open that can of worms, but I certainly agree that let me put it this way. There are a number of social experiments where people are put in charge of virtual cities. Imagine SimCity or whatever, with its own set of game-based rules. And beforehand, people are asked, hey, do you know how societies work? Well, what's your theory? You're like, oh, I'm a libertarian. Oh, I'm a socialist. I'm this, that. It's clear that if the state just ran this, or if it's clear if the people just left it up to whatever, what they figured out was the more preconceived notions anybody had going in to take charge of a system, on no matter what those preconceived notions were, as long as you had strong opinions going into it, that was a strong indicator that you were going to be a very bad mayor of this system. The best people go in saying, well, I don't know, I feel this, but you know, let's just see what we got. And they paid extreme attention to the data as it came in, so they were able to make small corrections early on without judgment, without feeling threatened that their belief was not the right belief or whatever. And those are the people who are good stewards of those cities or whatever. So I definitely resonate with your Oogie vibe that and for all I know, this is some mid-level, you know, presenter saying what are things I'd imagine everybody would agree with, you know, buy local, eat more healthy, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, Larry Page, they're not petting white cats somewhere going, they figured it out, destroy the plan, we'll have to come up with a new one. No,
but there are although there is the argument that this is a pitch video, right? Like if either for, at its most specific a product and at its most broad a general direction for which products can be developed toward. And if the person who made it is like, well, here are things that I know resonate, like there is a thought there that like, okay, well, this is what the crowd that you're playing to, and the crowd that you're playing to are people who make decisions at Google.
Well, and that's that's the thing is like, yeah, this did not come up in a vacuum, and we've seen this before. And and I go back to a scary debate was like James Damore, the guy who wrote his criticism of the gender politics and all that and racial stuff inside of Google. And this is a guy who I think approached this with a tact of a very introverted sort of engineer who may not have been very aware of how this would affect other people, whatever. But this a guy said something that upset a lot of people, and maybe a lot of it was not correct or whatever kind of thing like this. And Google's reaction was, we got to fire him, we got to let him go, whatever, because they can't handle. Was what he said in that memo the most disruptive thing that somebody said that day who worked for Google? I doubt it. Was firing the guy the right outcome for that? Maybe it was, but if you're an organization like Google who cares very much about the appearances of doing the right thing versus, saying, oh, you know what, this guy feels this way and I don't think he's right. How do we address this? We could say we could fire this person, and solve the problem, because other people, people who are accused of being, too sensitive were too upset to go to work the next day, which was.
There's also, though, like a very weird thing that is happening right now. Like I was watching the basketball game yesterday, and it felt like every other ad was either Facebook doing an apology commercial about how, hey, we started out being good, and then along the way we got bad, but now we swear we're going to be good again. Or Uber and their new CEO saying, remember all the bad things you didn't like about Uber, and we became this like cultural touchstone for out-of-touch technology run amok. Well, now we fired that guy, and I'm a new guy, so give us another shot. Like, there is this concept of big tech apologizing and being known by their actions, because I would say internally, when the Uber Lyft thing became a cultural divide, the thought within Uber was, whatever, we're still doing the most rides, we're still doing we're still growing at the appropriate scale, focus on winning, focus on going forward. And everybody laugh. I mean, I knew people inside of Uber that would like laugh at when Lyft did their ad campaign, parodying the, super tech broed, suited up boardroom in the gray antiseptic thing, compared to the, hey, we're just a fun, funky ride sharing company of Lyft. And now they're doing the exact same thing. So it's like, there is, as much as you can look at Google's decision to fire James Damore as like, hey, they can't handle, even let's categorize it as just a bad take, right? That they can't handle a bad take circulated in their email system. There is a cost these days to how we look at, these companies that are kind of defining our new reality and our business titans.
And I think part of it, the frustrating thing is, it's like, and I've said this before, I Google does amazing things. Google's business model, I get it. It's a brilliant business model. There is a trade-off there. And it's unfortunate Google can't come out and say, like you said, like, hey, this is how our business model is. It could be like, oh my God, like, no, it's been there all along. You want information, we find information, and then we sell ads to you. And some of the most important information is the things you do. And they're kind of transparent about that. But if you don't plaster all over this. We want to make the world better. We want to do no evil. These are our values. If you don't do all this virtue signaling, you get criticized. Yet the reality is Google's job is to return value to its investors. It's what it should be. And those investors, not just a bunch, it's teachers unions, it's your parents' pensions, it's this. It's to return value to investors. That's its job. If they deviate from that, they are not performing according to how those investors gave them money, and they are betraying the trust of the people who the purse promises they made to. And we have a problem with that. So as a society, we get upset when a company does the thing the company is supposed to do.
Man, I feel like we're just going to spin farther down the rabbit hole if we don't cut it off at that moment. But that is a complicated rabbit hole.
Good talk, though.
Robots, AI, helping us make better decisions, I'm all for.
Yeah.
I'm all for. I just want to know that its self-interest and my self-interest are mostly aligned.
Yeah.
You know, like
part of the
has
problem is nobody knows
that scale we made for people. What if we start telling them they're fatties? You know, then we could start selling them diet plans.
I mean, well, and plus also, like, we don't really have a strong sense as a society of what our personal data is worth. Like, if a man in a black suit and a giant suitcase said, hey, I would like to purchase all of your personal data. Here's $1 million. Is that a slam dunk yes, or is that a slam dunk no?
Brian, I've got 48 hours of you sitting on public toilets. What's that data worth to you?
Wait, I wasn't even thinking of buying it. I was thinking of selling it. I was like, how much are you going to give me?
Well, I'm open, you know.
I mean, the funny part is we don't really have a sense of whether getting paid $1 million for everything we are is a good value or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's changed too. Is the Google's ability to turn a profit on the information they have on you is increased. That's if you look at like 10 years ago, I mean, they made something like $14 or $20 per person per year on all your data. And that was why you could never call customer support at Google. It's like the time you spend 30 minutes on a phone call with somebody, they're losing money on you for the year. They've increased the amount of money they make per person on this, so it's going up. So now it's like something like $20 or $30. We're making like $100, $120 or something on average per person per year, you know, and that as the data has gotten better, as the data gets better, the ability to target advertising increases, keeps going up, you know, but also like there is an upper limit to the advertising industry. That's the other part of it too, is there's an X amount that people being able to pay. And that's why subscription services are now starting to become the new thing. It's why, you know, Netflix is worth as much as Disney without the same amount of revenue return, but they're like, man, you know, having people buy something for you, why Amazon does Prime, all that. So
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know what it's worth.
Man, heady stuff this week.
Yep. Picks.
Hell yeah.
Picks. Have we got picks?
Oh man, I guess I don't. Deadpool 2. Go see it. You'll laugh.
I got a pick. I'll tell you what, boys, this pick has changed my life, and it is FREE free. I don't know what it is. This little guy, water. For whatever reason, I got it in my head the other day that I wanted to drink 8 pints of water a day. I felt that I was underhydrated and I needed to hydrate myself. And it might be the dumbest thing in the world, but it's the dumbest thing in the world that I feel has positively affected my mind, my focus, and my attitude. To just listen, I pee like a racehorse, but I find that appetite controls
on 4 legs while running.
Exactly, by breaking out of the blocks and winning the Preakness. But I don't know. It's just been it's like a wild hair that I got up my butt, and I've done it for the last couple of weeks, and I've found myself better off.
I can't speak to whether or not it's an important thing for hydration, but I can speak to aesthetically how much I enjoyed the palate cleansing that came with going the full Dr. Furman diet of eating whole plants and giving up any kind of salts or any of that stuff. It is kind of nice, the aesthetic experience that you have by defaulting back to 0 and really with intentionality gauging how you feel about the other stuff you put in your body.
Bryce? Well, side note, I'll let you think. Okay. Justin, you got that article I sent you about how journalists are suffering from like dehydration and.
Yes, I did. It does not shock me.
Apparently,
no, there was a study where a couple journalists, I believe in England, did like full calorie or like intake stuff, and they monitored their sleep and everything, and they were found to be a bit haggard. Which any kind of deadline industry, I think you would find similar stuff, but it does put an interesting face on the news.
I have a quick pick. If you have kids, I think they might like the Who Was show on Netflix. It's a new series about historical figures and played out in songs and live action sketches, and it's a cute show. And I think if you were a parent watching this with your kid, you would not blow your brains out.
Oh, cool. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah. So check that out. That's on Netflix, the Who Was show.
So I'd like to continue the discussion about mega corporations controlling every aspect of our lives, pervasive advertising and creepiness and whatnot, but I'm not at this moment. Instead, I'm going to do my pick, which is Amazon Fresh. Which I brought that up. So Amazon Fresh, and it gets confusing because there's Amazon Pantry, there's Amazon, and then there's restaurants. And people are like, restaurants, what's that? I'm like, yeah, it's another thing. So Amazon Fresh is basically their grocery delivery service. And man, I'm lazy. I am really, really lazy. What I like about this is Justin brought up water. Now, I live across the street from a store, which is both good and bad.
I thought you were about to say from a lake.
Yeah, no, it's the store. It's good in that if I don't have to keep stuff in my pantry. The store's open 24 hours. I go get whatever I need. It's bad that because I don't drive my car there because it's across the street and I'd feel stupid. I don't keep enough water in the house because don't bring enough water bottles because I don't want to carry cases of water across the street. So I let that get low. But with Amazon Fresh, for a $5 tip and maybe a wave delivery charge, I can make some poor new economy freelancer cart 8 cases of water to my doorstep.
Yeah, buddy.
And have all the water I need, all the Diet Coke I need, all the whatever I need. So I've been using Amazon Fresh a lot. So
big shout out to Amazon Fresh. I love Amazon Fresh. I use it probably 2 or 3 times a month. Prices are good. Now they have Whole Foods stuff in there. I don't know how long it's going to be around because I don't know exactly where Amazon wants to go with grocery delivery now that they own Whole Foods, but I love it and I use it all the time.
Oh, I think it is not going away. Maybe it'll change the name, but I think it is only going to increase because the more they get people used to doing this, the more they even solve it. It's even more efficient than having you go to the grocery store, so.
Yeah. I from talking to a friend of mine that works with Whole Foods, post Amazon, and doing a little research myself, because I do love Amazon Fresh. They are two just different, the question is going to be exactly how they merge these two separate successful things. But I very much am excited about the future of Amazon Fresh, because I think it's right now I just have a thing that's just every 2 weeks I just refill the exact same cart. If it's over $40, it's free delivery. Boom, you can get it the next day, sometimes same day.
Yep, it's cool. All right, I guess that's it. It's been after.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Speaking of eating, I'm gonna go eat. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, we gotta get going too.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for checking out the show.
Yeah.
We'll see you in a few hours for Port Killers. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, damn, yo. Damn. It's time.
I'ma come through and show my woodline. Knocking those times. Showing pops around. Knocking those times. Showing pops around. Knocking those times. Showing pops around. I'ma come through and show my woodline. Knocking those times.